Order. I remind the House that on the 19th of November 2024, I granted a waiver from the House's sub judice resolution in respect of the related case of Dillon and others versus the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. As such, reference may be made to the case during proceedings. I now call the Shadow Secretary of State, Alex Burkhardt, to ask his UQ.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to make a statement on the draft Northern Ireland Troubles, Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023, Remedial Order 2025.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. This remedial order is a clear signal of the government's commitment to legislation that can command support across Northern Ireland. Its purpose is clear: to formally remove some of the provisions in the Northern Ireland Troubles, Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023 that were found by the courts in Dillon to be incompatible with our human rights obligations. Specifically, this means removing the provisions on immunity from prosecution and the bar on Troubles-related civil cases. Although the immunity provisions never commenced, it is essential that we formally remove them from the statute book. It is the government's belief that there are compelling reasons for proceeding with this order, and this is a view shared by the Joint Committee on Human Rights, which in its report on the 9th of December agreed that the government has such reasons and recommended that Parliament approve the order. The committee stated that, and I quote, "In these exceptional and unusual circumstances, the government has sufficiently compelling reasons to proceed by way of a remedial order." I want to set out what the government believes those reasons to be. Firstly, we must provide clarity on immunity and remove the bar on civil claims as quickly as possible. This is essential for all involved, victims, survivors and veterans, and is a prerequisite for building trust. Secondly, providing this clarity is vital to enable the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery to continue its work. It is my view that while immunity, a key plank of the 2023 Legacy Act, remains on the statute book, it will be difficult for ICRIR to obtain the confidence of all victims and survivors. As the JCHR rightly noted, the legacy of the past continues to have a profound and lasting impact, and we know that families and political parties were vehemently opposed to the immunity provisions. While the repeal of immunity is only one aspect of reforming the arrangements put in place by the 2023 Act, I am confident that its repeal will result in a greater confidence for referrals to be made. Given that many individuals are elderly, they cannot keep on waiting. It is the government's view that these changes should therefore be made through the remedial order as soon as possible. Mr Speaker, the government has a clear mandate, compelling reasons and a procedural basis which the JCHR has endorsed, and the House will have an opportunity to debate the order in the new year.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question, which I've asked because I think that there's a very real danger that the government may be about to break the law. And it's very important that the House is aware that the Joint Committee on Human Rights was not in possession of all of the facts when it wrote its report. Last year, the High Court in Belfast found parts of the Legacy Act to be incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. And at the time of the last election, the Conservative government was appealing that highly disputable decision. The incoming Labour government, for reasons it's never disclosed, chose to drop that appeal and subsequently has laid a draft remedial order to amend the legislation. Now, the problem with this, Mr Speaker, is that earlier this year, the Northern Ireland Veterans Movement was granted permission to intervene in the case before the Supreme Court. And on the 15th of October this year, Lord Wilson Casey, acting for the movement, did just that and gave written and oral submissions which the court are now considering. Consequently, it's entirely possible that the declarations of incompatibility relied on by the Secretary of State to lay the remedial order will be quashed. The case is very much live, and this is very important because under Section 10 of the Human Rights Act, a government only has the authority to use a remedial order unless and until all appeals in relation to declarations of incompatibility have been determined or abandoned. This test is not met. And if the government decides to push ahead with its remedial order, not only will it be acting ultra vires, it will set a terrible precedent which will mean that future governments may use remedial orders in ways that they were never intended to use. To avoid this, all the government needs to do is to commit to not pushing its remedial order to a vote until the Supreme Court has finally ruled. Will the Secretary of State make that commitment?
Very well done. Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for the point that he has raised, but I would say to him that the argument he puts is not correct. The appeal was abandoned by the government in July 2024, and he says, for reasons that have never been disclosed, the government has been absolutely clear from the beginning: we disagree with immunity and we are committed to repeal and replace the Legacy Act. And Section 10 gives a Secretary of State the ability to make a remedial order when a declaration of incompatibility has been made and any appeal has been determined or abandoned. It has been abandoned by the government. Now, the honourable gentleman has suggested that the ongoing Supreme Court appeal in Diplin means that the conditions have not been met, and therefore suggests that we may lack the vires to lay this order. I do not agree with his assessment, and have made the position clear to the honourable member in the correspondence that we have had, I think an exchange of 2 emails and 2 letters. I can confirm to the House that in July 2024 the government formally abandoned its appeal concerning the declaration of incompatibility relating to immunity from prosecution. That declaration was not part of the appeal that is now before the Supreme Court. And the fact that the Northern Ireland Veterans Movement was granted permission to intervene does not alter this legal reality.
Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last month, the House debated the Troubles Bill, and we heard many moving contributions about the devastating loss experienced by families, including military families, many of whom are still seeking answers. Does the Secretary of State agree that the voices of those whose governments, of the government's legislation, what it's for, should be at the forefront of our minds when we debate it and every time we debate it? Thank you.
I do agree with my honourable friend, and I would just further say that the honourable gentleman who speaks for the opposition and the principal opposition party remain, it seems, wedded to immunity, which was well, the honourable gentleman says once again, as he does in all these debates, conditional immunity. I think the last time we debated it, I reminded him what the legislation of the last government said. It said that the Commission must give immunity if the conditions for giving immunity are met, which are quite clearly, well, the honourable gentlemen have not reminded themselves of what their legislation said. All that was required was that for somebody to come forward and to say what they had done, and if what they had done was an offence, then the Commission must grant them immunity. And I would say to the opposition that at some point they do need to recognise that that provision for immunity for terrorists, because the last government said we wish to give immunity to terrorists, had no support in Northern Ireland. And I'm sorry that they don't recognise that, because I've said on many occasions, progress cannot be made in trying to deal with the problem of legacy when the provision that is in the current legislation, which we are committed to repeal and replace, has no support in the place that suffered more than anywhere else during the course of the Troubles.
Can I remind colleagues, if they wish to ask a question, they should be bobbing and try and reduce chuntering from the front benches. I ask the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Dr Pinkerton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the introduction of a remedial order is welcome and necessary, even if its timing is potentially vexed. This remedial order promises to finally end the policy of conditional immunity that was integral to the 2023 Legacy Act, a policy that may have had benign intentions, but which did put us at odds with our international legal obligations and which regrettably drew a moral equivalence between UK service personnel and terrorist paramilitaries. I note the Joint Committee on Human Rights' second report, published last week, which recommended its approval. However, I also note that committee's concern regarding the unusual sequencing and timing of the remedial order in relation to the forthcoming primary legislation. Now, given the overtly political processes that led to the 2023 Act, there is an additional responsibility, I would suggest, on this government to ensure that this process is handled properly and that the process, as much as the policy, is seen to be fair-handed. There is a broad recognition of the need to repeal and replace the 2023 Legacy Act, but we also need to acknowledge that the removal of conditional immunity has created real anxiety, particularly among veterans groups. They fear the risk of prosecution. And so I also welcome the Secretary of State's letter circulated yesterday, Annex A in particular. So can I just ask the Secretary of State, if I may, three things. First of all, to clarify...
You have exactly 1 minute and you've gone over, so my apologies. Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for what he said and for the support that he gives to what we are seeking to do in the remedial order. I acknowledge the responsibility that the government has. These are quite unusual circumstances, and the reason that we are here debating this is because the Joint Committee on Human Rights has acknowledged those unusual circumstances, and despite having made other comments in this report, which we will all have read, has come to the conclusion that they give their approval to this and have recommended that the House support it. And I welcome what the Joint Committee on Human Rights has had to say. I would also point out one other thing. The government, and I'll acknowledge this, did take a bit of time between the JCHR report on the 28th of February and producing the revised draft remedial order on the 14th of October. I just wish to inform the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the reason for that is that we had listened to the representations that have been made, particularly from the other side of the House, on the subject of interim custody orders in respect of sections 46 and 47, and in relation to the Supreme Court judgment in 2020. We reflected on that and we found what we think is an alternative way of achieving the same objective, and that is to be found in clauses 89 and 90 of the Troubles Bill that is currently before the House. And I would simply point out that the last government tried for 2.5 years to find a way of dealing with the Supreme Court judgment in the Adams case, was not able to do so, eventually accepted. The amendments moved in the other place that became sections 46 and 47, but it was acknowledging the arguments have been made that led the government, to amend the remedial order, which we then put before the House on the 14th of October.
Speaker, as a member of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, we published our second report on the Northern Ireland Remedial Order on 9th of December. The standing orders of both houses require the JCHR to scrutinise all remedial orders. The committee concluded that the virus of the order was satisfied and that all statutory requirements were fulfilled. However, the committee also felt that the circumstances were that it was only appropriate because the government gave compelling reasons about why this would have to come forward in this way while a bill was progressing through the House and there was a Supreme Court case ongoing. Does the Secretary agree with me that, that although the circumstances and the timing are not ideal, this is the best way forward?
Well, I do agree with my honourable friend. The circumstances are unusual, but the government does believe it has a compelling case, and the JCHR agreed with the government's assessment. Yeah.
Father of the House.
There's been a lot of very complex legal arguments alluded to today, but I think what the public are concerned, what I'm concerned about, is the state of mind of our veterans, some of them quite elderly, who only sought to serve their country decades ago. So the Secretary of State is a very moderate, clever, reasonable person. Given that there's really, in reality, no chance of a successful prosecution, and people would be horrified if there was a prosecution, what comfort can the Secretary of State now give to our veterans?
Well, I agree with the right honourable gentleman that we only have to look at the figures to see that the prospects of any prosecutions in any cases are increasingly remote because of the passage of time, the difficulty in obtaining evidence. But what the government has done, having listened very carefully to the representations that veterans have made, has been to set out in legislation the protections, and we will return to the House when we consider the bill in committee. Protection from repeated investigation, the right to stay at home, to seek anonymity, protection in old age, protection from cold calling, and the right to be heard. And I hope that when veterans get a chance to see precisely how they're going to work, the fact that they are contained in the legislation, they will reassured that the government is looking out for their interests.
Member Adam Jogi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's always important for Northern Ireland to be discussed on the floor of this House. We are, after all, one United Kingdom, so I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for putting the question to us. But we must never forget the people of Northern Ireland. So can I ask my honourable friend what recent engagement he's had with victims, survivors and other organisations representing them as part of his work to address the legacy of the past?
I have had many such meetings. The Victims and Survivors Forum, for example, I've met twice in the recent past to explain the legislation that the government has published. I would make the point that there is a great lack of trust on the part of victims and survivors in Northern Ireland who feel they've been let down many times before. And trust undermined it's very hard to rebuild it. They are taking account of the legislation the government has passed. It won't surprise the House if I say I believe it does provide a foundation for moving forward. But it's really, really important, as my honourable friend has said, that their voice is heard and heard loudly.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 12th of November, I raised with the Prime Minister the alarming statement from 9 former generals that attacked the government's approach to lawfare against our armed forces. They said it would erode trust in the justice system and it was a threat to national security. Can the Secretary of State confirm if the Prime Minister has met with these 9 former generals, and has it changed his approach to attacking veterans?
Well, I don't accept the characterisation that the honourable member puts before the House. The government is not engaging in lawfare against veterans. Well, I refute. I've read that letter and many others. I refute the suggestion that the government is engaging in lawfare. We have been meeting a very large number of veterans' organisations. I myself have met the SAS Association and others. Ministry of Defence ministers have met. We are listening, and the House will see when we come to committee stage the results of those considerations, because the government is absolutely determined to ensure that there are proper protections in recognition of the hugely important and dangerous role that those who served in Operation Banner performed in trying to keep the people of Northern Ireland and indeed of the United Kingdom safe.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a member of the JCHR, I'm concerned that the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary may have inadvertently misled the House when he suggests that our committee did not discharge our role seriously and consider all of the evidence in this case when we produced the report. The report which we produced recommended that this remedial order be made in no small part because of the incredible sensitivity around anything to do with the Northern Ireland Troubles and the need to make sure that we are building bridges across communities, and in no small part too, may I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, because of the seriousness with which the committee feels the Secretary of State takes this issue. It is therefore quite right, I believe, that the Secretary of State make this a remedial order. Does he not agree that it is not right, not serious politics, to play party politics with such a delicate issue?
Well, I would say to my honourable friend, who is a distinguished member of the committee, that I am grateful for the support that the Joint Committee on Human Rights has given for the remedial order and for the government's assessment of the compelling reasons. And personally, I'm not accusing anybody of anything else. I want to try and get this legislation right, as I've said to the House many times before, and I will work with all honourable members who will join me in that task.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State is perfectly entitled to pursue a policy desire of removing immunity. Indeed, he knows that my colleagues and I support that position. We found it quite difficult that yet another government was prepared to offer a different variation on immunity for the perpetrators of terror in Northern Ireland. We find that repugnant, so we support the notion that immunity should not stand. But that's not the question before the Secretary of State today. The question before the Secretary of State is whether he should misappropriate a remedial order process, which is about dealing with the incompatibility of human rights law, not incompatibility with his policy objectives. So for as long as a question still remains before the Supreme Court, which it does, though it's not his appeal, it is the Northern Ireland Veterans Movement, is it not better, given he's acknowledged there is an issue of trust on this issue, that he should just at least wait?
Well, I would say two things to the right honourable gentleman. Firstly, I would reject the suggestion that I or the government has misappropriated a remedial order or misapplied Section 10 of the Human Rights Act. And I would cite in aid of that argument that the JCHR, whose job it is to scrutinise, well, he shakes his head, it is their job to scrutinise. If they had come to the House and said, we don't think the case is made, well, the government, of course, would have respected that. That is not what the JCHR said. The second reason is time is not waiting for the victims. It is not. And that is why the government thinks. There are those I've spoken to say, well, as long as it's still on the statute book, even though it has been declared incompatible, we doubt whether we can trust the process. And having decided, Madam Deputy Speaker, to keep the Commission but to reform it, I think it's right we remove that uncertainty as swiftly as possible, and that is what the remedial order is seeking to do.
I think the whole House can agree this is a very serious and sensitive topic. Can I ask members to be mindful with their language and ensure that they're not heckling whilst they are seated? I call Select Committee Member David Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State, you've already confirmed that under the Legacy Act, the immunity provisions were never commenced, and so therefore it's important to say that nobody ever was granted immunity under them. But sticking with the subject of immunity, the three Veterans Commissioners for Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales have all said they do not call for immunity under the law, but fairness under it. Does he agree with them?
I agree with that statement completely, which is why I must confess my disappointment that the opposition is still clinging to the notion of immunity, including immunity for terrorists. The Veterans Commissioners are quite right. They want fairness, and that is what the government is determined to deliver.
Sir Edmund Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I just simply say to the Secretary of State, it does seem like ridiculous haste when the Act is going through right now, and that surely to do this when he knows for a fact that there is already an appeal going on does, as has already been said, become abusive in terms of the real purpose of a remedial order. And I suggest to him really that for all the stuff about the fact of people being let off, all to do with the fact of immunity, that's not the issue. The issue today is, are they misusing their powers to rush something through which they could have dealt with through the course of this Act?
Well, I make 2 points to the right honourable gentleman who served with such distinction in Northern Ireland. Is first of all, as we have just heard, immunity was never commenced. It was declared incompatible. It was also struck down under Article 2. And I reject again the suggestion that the government is somehow abusing the process. If that was an argument, then one might have expected the Joint Committee on Human Rights to have agreed with it. It did not. It heard all of the points that have been put, and it concluded that in these particular circumstances it was right to proceed, and that is why it is recommending to the House that it should support the remedial order.
Katrina Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week's exhibition in the upper waiting hall is a memorial quilt produced by members of the South East Fermanagh Foundation. It's a very moving way to remember those who have been innocent victims of terrorism. The dates on those quilts panels remind us how long those families have been fighting for justice. Can I ask the Secretary of State what message he wants to send out to every person who has produced one of those quilt panels for SEF, but also to all of those other families from this statement today?
Well, I met on Monday night with the families who'd come over for the unveiling of the quilts. Could I say to all members of the House, if you haven't had a chance to go up to the upper waiting hall to look at them, I would urge you to do so, because the story they tell is profoundly moving, but is a reminder of the continuing search for justice that so many people in Northern Ireland have got. And I would look at those quilts and say it is an argument for what we're trying to do to secure legislation that can actually help find those answers for all those people who are remembered on the quilts that are upstairs.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In regards to the Secretary of State and the accusation about rushing this through, he will be conscious of an Irish government that isn't rushing anything through in regards to the support, in regards of what's actually doing. Yesterday, the Justice Minister in the Republic of Ireland received permission from the government to draft priority legislation to enable state bodies to give oral evidence to the Omagh inquiry. Madam Deputy Speaker, that was only because the Omagh families are taking legal action. Can I ask the Secretary of State what engagement he has had with the Irish government actually in regards to bringing forward legislation that matches what is he bringing forward to this place? And can I actually ask him who's he dealing with at the minute? Because it used to be the Taoiseach Simon Harris, who's now been promoted, or is it the Justice Minister who's bringing forward this, or is it the new FDA Minister?
Well, my most recent meeting, and I have many meetings with Irish ministers and discussions with the Taoiseach of the Taoiseach, was with Helen McEntee, who has just taken over from Simon Harris at the Foreign Affairs Ministry. I very much welcome the fact that the Irish government has announced that it's preparing to draft the legislation, as Simon Harris had committed to me while standing next to me, in time for the next hearings of the Omagh bombing inquiry, because that is evidence that the Irish government intends to fulfil the commitments it's made in the joint framework.
Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to commend the Secretary of State for the care he's taking to be as fast as possible for those victims, survivors and veterans' families who need to hear answers, but the care that he's taking to make sure this is legally correct. And I would echo the comments about the South East Fermanagh Foundation quilt in Parliament today, which reminds us of the need to get those answers for families. And can the Secretary of State confirm that he's concerned, as I am, that the opposition are just interested in making political points rather than really building peace, which is what we need to do together as members of the House? And would he confirm that the remedial order removes what would have been immunity for terrorists?
Well, I would say to my honourable friend, I think all members of the House have a shared commitment to trying to ensure that the peace that Northern Ireland has enjoyed since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement is maintained. All of us do. We have a difference of view about, in some respects, about the right way of seeking to do that. And I am always willing to be challenged on the arguments that I put on behalf of the government, and to challenge the arguments that I hear from the opposition front benches. In the end, we know that we have to deal with this because the last bit of legislation failed to achieve, as someone said earlier, whatever its intentions, failed to achieve its purpose. It did not command support in Northern Ireland, and that is why we have to make progress.
Sir Julian Lewis.
May I just ask the Secretary of State to clarify whether his earlier remarks mean what I think they mean, which is that even if it had not been for the guidance of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, the government would anyway wanted to have repealed the legislation of the Legacy Act. It's a political decision, and given that he said that he did not believe that there would be convictions at the end of this process, does that not mean that there will be several, if not many, trials? And if no one is convicted at the end of the process, how does that help anyone? And how does it avoid just torturing the people who are put through the trials?
Very good. Well, if I may just correct what I think was the interpretation that the Right Honourable Member was putting on what I had said. I made it quite clear a moment ago. Had the Joint Committee on Human Rights reached a different conclusion about the appropriateness of the remedial order, the government would of course respect it. I also made clear in my earlier comments, this government came into office committed to get rid of immunity. We've been quite clear about that from the start, and the remedial order will seek to give effect to that. If one looks at the figures, we've discussed prosecutions of veterans. There has been one successful prosecution of a veteran since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. One. And the point I was making is, if you look at the figures, well, there are currently 9 live cases before the courts relating to the Troubles. 7 of them relate to paramilitaries, 6 of those relate to the provisional IRA. And I've heard the argument from those benches opposite, oh, well, none of the paramilitaries are getting prosecuted. That is not the case. It's really important that we have these debates on the basis of facts.
Jim Allister.
The Secretary of State doesn't need me to tell him that he and the government are struggling to command veteran support for his bill. Could I therefore ask him, in order to address that deficit of support, should he not consider an amendment to Clause 3 to have the Veterans Commissioner for Northern Ireland serve on the Legacy Commission? Wouldn't that be a token of making good on the Secretary of State's affirmation that this is about capturing the confidence of veterans and not pursuing lawfare against them?
Well, as I've already indicated, I reject the suggestion that the government is in any way engaging in lawfare against veterans, in the same way that I reject any suggestion there are such things as politically motivated or vexatious prosecutions. Well, the honourable gentleman says from a sedentary position, oh, come on. I've heard those words from opposition members in previous debates on these questions. There will no doubt be a number of amendments and suggestions made when we come to detailed consideration of the bill, and we will consider them at the time.
Sir Geoffrey Cox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if the Secretary of State can assist me with this problem. The Supreme Court is at the moment seized of the issue as to the lawfulness of the declaration of incompatibility. The fact that the government has withdrawn its appeal does not prevent the Supreme Court from ruling on it. Let us suppose the Supreme Court rules that the declaration of incompatibility is void. Suppose that would mean, therefore, that that legal position is that the declaration of incompatibility would be void. And therefore the basis on which the order that the Secretary of State is proceeding on would be removed. Surely it would be prudent to wait to see if the Supreme Court rules on it, because otherwise what will be doing is proceeding with an unlawful order. I wonder if the Secretary... I'm asking in the spirit of genuine curiosity and inquiry, not political partisanship. If this is going to bring this entire process into disrepute, if what he's doing is in fact acting upon an unlawful basis.
Well, once again, I would say I don't accept that the government is acting on an unlawful basis. Given the honourable gentleman's distinguished legal credentials and experience, I would say to him, I note that he encourages me to speculate on a potential, well, he does, on a potential outcome. The government has to deal with the position as we find it. I've already set out to the House why the government is absolutely clear in its view that because the appeal was withdrawn, we are able to make use of Section 10 of the Human Rights Act in order to remove conditional immunity.
Sarah Potin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton highlighted the need to recruit people into our armed forces in order to protect this nation. My question to the Secretary of State is, how does he expect to do that when those that served gallantly in Northern Ireland face prosecution? Why would young men and women join our armed forces with the risk of that happening to them? What message does that send to those young people?
I would say to the honourable member, I meet many young people in my constituency and other duties who are very keen to come and serve the nation in the armed forces. I am not aware of any figures that suggest that there has been a decline in recruitment. If she's seen them, perhaps she could draw them to my attention, because trying to get dealing with the past right should not affect the willingness, particularly the threats that we face in the modern world, from encouraging young people and others to come forward and serve the nation as people have done over the centuries.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State has spoken of additional protections in his legislation. Why does he think that Operation Banner veterans, some of whom I represent, remain unconvinced and remain troubled? And why does he think that the Irish Prime Minister believes that there are no additional protections? And whilst he's about it, can he do something to reassure veterans who are feeling very unhappy with this, perhaps along the lines of saying categorically that no former terrorists or members of proscribed organisations will serve on the Legacy Commission?
Well, I've already made it clear to the House that those who have engaged in paramilitary activity, as long as I'm in this post, have no intention of appointing them to any of the posts that are contained in the bill. On the protections, I think we all have a responsibility to explain and to point out that they are in the draft legislation in clauses 30, 31, 36, 91, 84, 54, 56, 69 and 8. They are real, tangible protections, and they do respond very directly to the concerns that veterans have raised with the government. The reason we've introduced them is because of our determination to make sure that veterans are treated properly.
Alex Easton.
Deputy Speaker, Secretary of State, the official opposition are saying to hold off on the remedial order until the Supreme Court judgment. Have you actually sought any legal advice on this, and can you share it with the House?
Not yet. The word "you" is not appropriate, so if he wants to rephrase and quickly get to his point.
Has the Secretary of State sought any legal advice on the issue, and can he share it with the House? And can he also give us an update on the Irish Government in terms of making sure that the Irish Government produce all legal papers on their role on the IRA and the involvement of the Garda Síochána?
Well, as the honourable gentleman will be well aware, there is a long-standing tradition that the government does not reveal the legal advice it receives. All governments receive legal advice, but we don't share it because that's part of the business of government. I've already made reference to the announcement that the Irish government has made in respect of legislation to enable witnesses to give evidence to the Omagh bombing inquiry, which I welcome.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Secretary of State confirm whether or not the remedial order will have to be voted on in the other place?
Yes, it will be voted on in both houses in the new year.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Despite what the Secretary of State continues to say in this House, the prosecution of elderly veterans has been vexatious. In the Soldier F trial, the judge agreed with the submissions of the defence that the threshold to prosecute was far from being reached. Political interference brought this matter to court. How, if the Secretary of State can't even accept that there's been vexatious prosecutions, does he ensure that this remedial order gives a clear distinction between the bomber who presents him or herself as a victim and the ordinary man and woman or child who were murdered or maimed by the actions of terrorists?
Well, there is the clearest distinction between the two groups of people that the honourable member refers to, and I've made it clear from the dispatch box on a number of occasions, there is absolutely no equivalence between those who sought to protect the public and those who committed the most appalling terrorist atrocities. I have to respectfully disagree with the honourable member, because if she is arguing that prosecutions have been vexatious, she is saying that our independent prosecutors are working on a basis that is out with their task, which is in all cases, look at the evidence, is there a reasonable prospect of a conviction, is it in the public interest to prosecute? And if we undermine the independence of independent prosecutors, the separation between the government and the court system, we are sunk as a nation. And that is why I'm so firm in saying there is no such thing as a vexatious prosecution.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Notwithstanding the fact that the Secretary of State has said the chances of a successful prosecution are very limited indeed, the fact is the punishment is in the process of investigation and trial in the first place. So will the Secretary of State now look sympathetically at appropriate amendments to the bill to make sure that the bar is raised very, very high, so it's almost impossible for one of our brave veterans to be prosecuted in our courts?
Well, as I've said to the House before, of course I will look carefully at all of the amendments that are put down to the bill when we come to debate it at committee stage and report of the whole House here. The test, as I indicate in answer to the previous question, for prosecutions is the same now. It will be the same in the future as it has been for the last 30, 50, 70 years. Those of greater legal experience will be able to tell the House how long that has been the case. It will not change because it depends on the evidence. What we are doing is setting out in the bill that in order to reinvestigate things, the Commission has to be of the view that it is essential to do so, and that is a very high bar, the word essential.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Canova report was clear in proving that there was no evidence of state collusion or machinations, and yet the Republican drum still bangs to cover the sound of the voices of the innocents, calling for justice and to be heard. So how will the Secretary of State respond to the lack of protection for the service personnel and the perpetual deliberate focus on them, and look at the 2,057 murders carried out by Republicans and the 1,027 loyalist murders which haven't received any justice at all, and will provide yet another whitewash over the blood of the innocents have been shed, and the impact it still has on all of those families throughout the province? Thank you.
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, for whom I have the greatest respect, I think he and I hope the whole House, share the desire to enable answers to be provided for all those families who are living with the pain of not knowing what happened to their loved ones. The Canova report has made a very important contribution to seeking to uncover the truth. We have drawn on a number of the lessons of Canova in drafting the legislation, including the Victims and Survivors Advisory Panel, because many people said that was one of the great things about the way Canova went about its job. It is in the draft bill that the House will consider again shortly.
Point of order, Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, the point I was trying to raise in my question to the Secretary of State was that on any issue to do with the Northern Irish Troubles, we must tread with appropriate solemnity and seriousness. It was therefore disappointing to be accused of being an idiot by the opposition front bench whilst making this very point. So could I ask, what advice would you give me on ensuring that the honourable member for Raleigh and Wickford appropriately apologises, not to me, but to this whole House, for lowering the tone of the serious debate?
If I had heard any inappropriate language, I would have dealt with it very swiftly and dealt with that member involved, and no inappropriate language should be used in the chamber. And a topic such as this, which is highly charged, emotional and very serious, we need to double down and make sure we're using the most appropriate language. Now, Mr. Francois, before you respond, please remember you're also responding to me in the chair. No doubt you will not want to displease me either with any of your response going forward. Mr. Francois.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm too experienced to try and displease you in any way. For clarity, I was responding to the fact that the honourable gentleman had accused, had accused my right honourable friend of saying something which, as Hansard will prove conclusively in the morning, he clearly did not say. So, if he feels that word, and you, Madam Deputy Speaker, was inappropriate, I withdraw it. But I will say I still believe that the honourable gentleman was wrong.
I do not wish to prolong the debate, and no doubt that will be seen by most as an apology. We have finished this urgent question. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over. If the Secretary of State would be seated, I can. Urgent question, Dr. Caroline Johnson.
If the Secretary of State will make a statement on the Pathways Puberty Blockers trial.
Secretary of State, West
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me just start by acknowledging the sensitivities around this issue, the strong beliefs held around this House, and for all the division and divided opinion we have, there is a shared determination of everyone, I believe, in this House to do the right thing by a vulnerable group of children and young people. It is for those reasons that I'm taking the course of action that I am. Put simply, that is to follow expert clinical advice and take an evidence-led approach. The CAS review found shocking levels of unprofessionalism, a lack of clinical oversight, and puberty blockers prescribed to children without sufficient evidence that doing so was safe or beneficial to those children and young people. What Dr. Hilary Cass uncovered was a scandal. That is why, on coming to office, I made the temporary ban brought in by my predecessor a permanent ban. Dr. Cass also recommended a thorough study to establish how best to support children and young people suffering gender incongruence. That is the Pathways study. It has 4 main parts, one of which is the clinical trial to study the effects of puberty-suppressing hormones on young people's physical, social and emotional well-being. The other aspects of the Pathways study will track the physical, social and emotional well-being of all young people attending UK NHS gender services. It will look at young people's thinking and brain development following both those who are and are not taking puberty-suppressing hormones. And it will gather evidence direct from young people, parents and staff about their experiences of living with gender incongruence. The bar for this trial to be approved was extremely high, and oversight will be rigorous. Children cannot consent to being on this trial, so places will require parental consent as well as the assent of young people. And because protecting and promoting the health and well-being of affected young people is our primary concern, there are strict eligibility criteria in place to join the Pathways clinical trial. As such, the number of young people who would expect to qualify for the trial will also be low. Participants must undergo thorough mental and physical assessments and will be followed over a number of years with regular well-being checks. Puberty blockers have also been used to delay puberty in children and young people who start puberty much too early. Use in those cases has been extensively tested and has met strict safety requirements for that use. The study is being led by King's College London and the South London and Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust. It has been carefully checked by independent scientists who advise the National Institute for Health and Care Research and by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency and received approval from a Research Ethics Committee. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am treading cautiously in this area because the safety of children must come first.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I first must declare my interest as a consultant paediatrician who has looked after children with gender dysphoria in the past and is likely to do so in the future. And we must remember that there are vulnerable children that we are talking about today. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first and most obvious question is why? Why has this government chosen to fund experiments with puberty blockers on physically healthy children? Despite saying he was comfortable with this trial in a briefing to MPs, the Secretary of State told the media on Friday and Select Committee this morning that he is in fact uncomfortable with it. Why is it even being considered before the data linkage study is complete? 9,000 children went through the Tavistock. Many of them came out regretting being encouraged to irreversibly damage their bodies. We should look carefully at those outcomes before we make the same mistakes. What steps is he taking to secure the data from the Tavistock and have it analysed? What steps is he taking to hold to account those obstructing access to data linkage information? And what assessment has he made of the motivations of those obstructing that data when this is a study to safeguard children? And what of the trial itself? 226 children will go through this trial. Is that a limit or a target? These children will be randomised to getting puberty blockers now or in a year's time. All will be analysed at 2 years. They will still be children. They may only be 11 years old. How can these results demonstrate a meaningful outcome? The control group isn't properly randomised but chosen from the Horizon Intensive Trial Group. Is the Secretary of State concerned that this will introduce bias? The criteria of getting puberty blockers under this trial requires just one parent to consent and for the clinician to think it will benefit the child. But on what basis will the clinician decide? The CAS review said the vast majority of children with gender dysphoria will recover, with only a few persisting with trans identities into adulthood. It is not possible to predict which those children will be. So does he accept that the vast majority of children in this, his treating trial, will be given drugs, will be physically healthy children whose distress would get better without any puberty blockers, and that therefore the vast majority of the children in this trial are being unnecessarily experimented on with risky medications under his leadership?
The Shadow Minister asks why, to which there is a simple answer. Why is because it was recommended by Dr. Cass in the Cass review, which was commissioned by my predecessor, Sir Sajid Javid. I think that was the right thing to do, and it's why when my predecessor brought forward the Cass review, I supported it in opposition and certainly didn't try and play politics with an extremely vulnerable group of children and young people. In terms of why, I'll tell her why, because under the previous government, those puberty-suppressing hormones were prescribed without proper oversight, supervision or safety, and we didn't hear a peep for years about that fact until Dr. Cass, commissioned by Sir Sajid Javid, who deserves enormous credit for it, did the study that was published, widely supported, with this recommendation. And they may have changed their tune in opposition, but I do remember what the Conservatives said in government when they published the Cass review and supported its recommendations. And I think that is a real shame. She accuses me of inconsistency, so let me be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. Am I comfortable that this clinical trial has undergone the proper process and ethical approval to ensure the highest standards and supervision? Yes, I'm comfortable about that. Am I uncomfortable about puberty-suppressing hormones for this group of young people, for this particular conditions? Yes, I am, because of risks. It is why I was also uncomfortable when I put in place upheld the temporary ban by my predecessor, but then put in place a permanent ban. The reason I was uncomfortable with that too is because I had to look children and young people in the eye and their parents who told me in no uncertain terms that that decision was harmful to them, as have many other clinicians who've opposed that decision. And the reason why, whatever my discomfort in this extremely sensitive area, I have made this decision is because I am following clinical advice. And because as Health Secretary, it is my responsibility to follow expert advice. And had the Tavistock Clinic faced such challenge and scrutiny a decade ago, we wouldn't be in this mess. The Conservatives were right to commission the Cass review. They were right to accept its recommendations. I accept there is now a difference on this particular recommendation. I would urge members not to walk away from the cross-party consensus we built behind that approach, to build on the work that Dr Cass has done. As for the important questions she raises, there will be 2 groups within the trial, as well as a further control group of children and young people with gender incongruence who do not receive puberty-suppressing hormones. At least 226 participants are required in order to detect a statistically significant difference between the 2 treatment groups. However, this is not a target, and no young person will find themselves on this trial because there is a drive to make sure there is a certain number of young people participating. In order to participate in this trial, it has to have the most robust clinical oversight from clinicians within the service, as well as national oversight and the consent of parents. And it is only where it is deemed that young people would benefit that they will be on this programme. She asked about the data linkage study. That's important. The data linkage study will be undertaken. When the data linkage study is completed, it will not provide us with the same evidence as this clinical trial. That's why Dr Cass made a distinction between this trial and the data linkage study. She asks about the motivations of those who withheld data. That is an extremely important question. I think it is utterly appalling that anyone in a position of responsibility in the NHS withheld data on a very vulnerable group of children and young people. I also accept that while there were many people in the Tavistock Clinic involved in these services, the fact that Dr Cass found such a lack of rigour, such a lack of standards, such a lack of proper oversight is disgraceful. And it is the clinicians who are well-meaning and ideologically driven that have given me most cause for concern in this whole debacle and have done more harm to children and young people and the trans community than most other people who've taken part in this debate and discussion. Finally, I do appreciate the work that Dr Cass has done. I'm glad that she is in the other place, bringing welcome scrutiny. Were she not supportive of this approach, I may think again. She's given her recommendation. She's given her support. I'm following clinical advice. It is not comfortable, but I do believe it is the right thing to do on balance.
Select Committee Member Danny Beales.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The front bench opposite asks why. Well, why? Because trans people exist and their health needs exist. And as the spokesperson for the government has clearly outlined, an independent review made a series of recommendations. There were clearly failures of healthcare, and a further recommendation was a clinical trial to address this issue. I believe the opposition supported the Cass review, but when it comes to implementing this part of it, suddenly there's collective amnesia on the benches opposite about what Dr Cass recommended. And doesn't the Secretary of State agree that in the absence of a trial, there isn't no access to these drugs? We know that young people are seeking out private provision. They are seeking unregulated providers of these drugs, and therefore a clinical trial is both appropriate and the best and safest way of managing any potential risks.
I thank my honourable friend. I have to say that risk he sets out was one of the considerations that I had to weigh up. Firstly, when upholding the temporary ban, then when making the ban permanent. And I do worry that outside of a trial, we may continue to see unsafe or unethical practice. And I think we will be doing a service to medicine in this country, as well as internationally, if we have a high-quality trial with the highest standards of ethics, approvals, oversight and research from some of our country's leading universities and healthcare providers to make sure that for this particular vulnerable group of children and young people, we're taking an evidence-based approach to health and care.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Morgan, you have up to 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would hope that everyone in this House can agree that medical treatment should always follow the evidence on safety and effectiveness. And it's right that expert clinicians are building this evidence base, and therefore right that the government is seeking to run this trial, because it should be led by evidence and not by ideology. So, given that the numbers on the trial are going to be very small, and the waiting list for talking therapies, which is so important for children and their parents, is very, very long, with hundreds of thousands on the waiting list. Can the Secretary of State explain how he will increase access to NHS talking therapies so people can get the help that they need and deserve? And in a field with so little research, can he confirm if the Pathways trial is looking at international best practice in order to take learnings from abroad?
I'm grateful to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for her question. I can absolutely assure her that we are doing that wider research, that of course we will take into account high quality international evidence as well as the research we're undertaking domestically. It is so important that we recognise that for many young people with gender incongruence, even if approved, puberty blockers will never be the right medication. And one of the things that I have been most saddened by with the discourse among adults in this debate, many of whom should know better, is that by elevating puberty blockers to the status that they have received in public discourse and debate, there are many young people out there who think that not only is this the gold standard of care, but it is the only care available. And of course, that is not true. NHS England has opened 3 new children and young people's gender services in the North West London and Bristol, with a 4th planned for the East of England in 2026, and we aim to have a service in every region of England in the coming years. These services use a different model with multidisciplinary teams, including mental health support and paediatrics within specialist children's hospitals to provide good clinical care. The new services will increase capacity, reduce waiting times so that patients can be seen sooner and closer to home. And we've also commissioned additional support for young people waiting to be seen through local children and young people's mental health services.
Only because I can't see her in any more pain. Preet Gill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my honourable friend for his leadership. But can I just say, as a former Children's Services Manager, I am concerned that credible safeguarding warnings from clinicians and academics about puberty suppression in children are not actually being heard. So will the Secretary of State meet those experts and review the younger age limit for participation in this trial, given that children as young as 10 are currently set to be involved?
I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for her question, and let me reassure her and the House that I am absolutely open to receiving representations and evidence from clinicians involved in the care of children and young people with insight, expertise and data, including those who might be critical of the approach that the trial team is setting out, or indeed critical that the CAS review included this recommendation. The reason why I think that is important is because of the many things that's gone horribly wrong in this area was the silencing of whistleblowers, the silencing of rigorous debate and discussion. Of course, we've got to do that with due care and sensitivity in mind, for young people in particular in this vulnerable group, for the wider trans community who feel extremely vulnerable in this country at the moment, including as a result of decisions I have taken as the Health and Social Care Secretary. So we have to consider all of that in the round. But we must make sure at all times we're following the evidence, that we're open to scrutiny and challenge, and that where we're making these finely balanced judgments, that we're doing so with rigorous debate, the testing of the arguments, the testing of the evidence and data. And that's why I do welcome the urgent question in this discussion.
Committee Member Joe Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State said earlier that there is an extremely high bar to him stepping in and stopping these tests using puberty blockers. What bar could be higher than a government protecting children from being tested on with drugs specifically to stop or alter their sexual development? There is not a unified clinical view on this. It is his choice. He's the Secretary of State. These tests are on him.
Look, I certainly don't need to be told what my responsibilities are in relation to this. I always take responsibility for decisions I take. I acknowledge the extent to which he and members of his party are seeking to weaponise this issue and to personalise it. We can just simply refer back. We can just simply refer back to the honourable gentleman's question just now, and we can refer to the reference of the shadow ministers to the Streeting trial. If that is not personalising, I don't know what is. But I tell you what, I'll tell you what, I'll take an evidence-based approach. I have done that on this issue from day one. Had the Conservatives done so, we would never have seen the Tavistock scandal. We would never have seen puberty blockers dished out willy-nilly to children and young people in this vulnerable patient group. I have sought at all times, including when I was sat on those benches, to treat this debate with the care and sensitivity and the humility it deserves, to not be tribal in my interactions. I only wish this Conservative opposition would take the same approach.
We're only at the start of this urgent question, so I ask members to reduce the temperature in the chamber. Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for the care and sensitivity he has taken to this subject all along. It's been an undeniably difficult year for transgender people in Britain. I've spoken to young trans people who've been pushed to the brink of suicide by what they hear, that they don't have a right to exist, that they don't deserve rights, that they're legitimate targets for ridicule. And we all in this House have a responsibility to lower the temperature and focus on their welfare, health and dignity. King's College operate the highest standards of safety. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that their expertise and rigour will support the well-being of participants and ensure we get the robust evidence we need and that vulnerable children are no longer treated as political punch bags?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. She's absolutely right. That we must engage with due care and sensitivity on this issue. I can share with the House that these exchanges, government policy, what is said by me and others, is followed extremely closely by this group of children and young people who are extremely online, by the wider LGBT+ community, and my honourable friend is right, that trans people are often at the wrong end of the statistics when it comes to being victims of hate crime and discrimination and mental ill health. We must always tread carefully when talking about suicide in this context and bear in mind the warnings of the government's advisor on suicide prevention, Professor Lewis Appleby, and the way in which that issue has been deployed irresponsibly by critics of the ban on puberty blockers that was put in place. We bear all of those things in mind. I do think we've got a high quality trial set up. I do have confidence in the clinicians. We've had a cross-party briefing from the clinical team. I'm very happy to repeat that exercise and to keep coming back to the House and to arrange briefings for MPs on a cross-party and for peers on a cross-party basis so that we can follow this closely as we should.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the care with which my right honourable friend has approached much of this, and I appreciate that he has before him some very difficult decisions, especially because of the way the report was written. But I must come back to the simple truth that these are very, very young children. Decisions will be made for them, I appreciate, by parents taking that element of consent, that are genuinely irreversible. And whatever happens, we're going to see 8, 9, 10-year-olds grow up to 18, 20, 25-year-olds, at least we hope we will, who have effectively been experimented on. Now, some of those children are going to resent very greatly, not just the system, not just their parents, but those who allowed this to happen. And here I identify the Department for Health and Social Care, not necessarily the Minister himself. What provision is he putting in place to make sure that should those children wish to bring legal action against the department, against those who took these decisions at a time when they were not able to give any form of informed consent, they will be able to have redress, they will be able to have their day in court?
Can I firstly thank the right honourable member for the way in which he puts his concerns, and I know he is concerned about this trial. I know he's stated publicly his opposition to it, and I enormously respect the way in which he has done that. And these are finely balanced judgments, and I acknowledge that. The CAS review found that puberty blockers have been prescribed routinely without good evidence for their safety or effectiveness. And that's why a clinical trial was proposed. They are licensed and used safely in much younger children for precocious puberty or older adults for certain cancers. For adolescents, the interaction with all the different processes of puberty may be very significant, which is why more evidence and a better understanding of their impact is needed in this patient group. Anyone on the trial can choose to stop taking puberty-suppressing hormones and leave the trial at any time. They do not need to give a reason. If a young person decides to stop taking puberty-suppressing hormones, their care in the NHS, including the gender service, will not change in any other way, and their doctors will explain to them and their parent or guardians what treatment options are available. And I know there are concerns about longer-term impacts on fertility. Prospective participants will be given comprehensive information on the advantages and potential risks of these hormones, including details about preserving fertility. Doctors will explain the possible long-term consequences and available options. Young people will also be offered to consult a fertility specialist, and the young person and their parent or guardians must clearly demonstrate a full understanding of all of these issues, and only then, after that, would a clinician sign off on the admission to the trial.
I ask colleagues to keep their questions short and for the Secretary of State to keep his responses on point. Select Committee Member Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope that we can all agree that the young people involved should not be used by anyone as a political football. Can my honourable friend please assure me that this process and trial will be clinically led and not as a result defined by rhetoric in this place or anywhere else?
I can certainly give my honourable friend that assurance.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I also welcome the tone and the sensitivity that the Right Honourable Gentleman has taken to this issue, not just today but throughout. We all recognise that we should be led by evidence in this. It's absolutely vital. But the trans community is, as has already been mentioned, a reality. They feel very vulnerable, very attacked, and there are those who have been on these medications for some time and are now concerned that they may no longer be available. What can he tell us to reassure them that they will be safe?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, there have been, as I reported at the time that we put in place the permanent ban, there have been arrangements for people who were previously being prescribed puberty blockers. For people who wanted to access them but couldn't once the ban came in, they have not been able to access them through authorised means. I recognised when I took that decision and through the representations that I have received both directly and in writing, that caused considerable pain and distress to a very vulnerable group of children and young people and people who care very much about them. That has not been something I'm indifferent to and something that I have taken very much into consideration. But with respect to all of those people I have met, no amount of political pressure should deter a health secretary from moving away from the clinical advice and expert opinion that really should underpin these sorts of decisions.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the trial and I commend the Secretary of State for following clinical advice and for the work of government in trying to build a consensus for the most minoritised communities in our country. Can I ask the Secretary of State, a man who I know to have empathy and thoughtfulness, to speak directly to trans people who will be watching this debate, who may at this Christmas time be struggling with estrangement from family and from other difficulties? Can he speak to the dignity and worth to which they are entitled and send a message that this House has their back?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. Look, I recognised that the decision I took literally within days of coming into this office was received by trans people in particular and the wider LGBT plus community as a negative decision that detrimentally impacted on their rights and identity. That was why it was an uncomfortable decision for me to take. I knew how it would be received, and I had to balance up risk in that decision. I believed it was, and I still believe, by the way, it was the right thing to do for the right reasons, a clinically led decision, And when it comes to the care and health for children and young people in particular, I make no apology for exercising extreme caution. I do want trans people in our country to know that this is a government that respects them, respects their identity, wants them to live with dignity and safety and inclusion. That is the approach the government is taking. I realise that decisions I have personally taken have not been received in that way, and that has not been comfortable for me, but I do believe it's been the right thing to do.
Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we were resting this judgment on purely clinical evidence, it would be to tell every child that whatever sex they are is immutable and cannot be changed, and that if they take these puberty blockers, they may well find they have irreversibly changed the course of their lives. How is a child of 10 or 11 going to be capable of making that judgment? And whatever the CAS review says, in the end, it is his judgment. And I remember the COVID inquiry repeatedly saying it was wrong for ministers to hide behind the science. And equally, there is no single clinical advice. Clinicians are as equally divided as the rest of society on this question. We rely on his judgment, and I'm afraid I think he's got it wrong.
Well, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question and the way in which he puts his criticism too. And for the avoidance of doubt, as I said earlier, I know what my responsibilities are. I understand the decisions that I take in this office, and I understand that I'm accountable for those decisions, and I don't resolve from that. I am following clinical advice. I do think that is the right thing to do in this area. On the question of sex, he is right. Sex is immutable, and even having undergone treatment with hormones or surgery, there are still nonetheless underlying biology means that, for example, trans women would still need to be screened and treated, bearing in mind their biological sex, and the opposite being true for trans men. And we have to draw that distinction between biological sex and gender identity. The final thing I would say is, whatever my discomfort and personal views about this particular trial might be, or the notion of young people using puberty blockers in this way, I cannot ignore, and I should convey faithfully to the House, conversations I've had with trans young people and adults who have described in very powerful and unforgettable terms not just the life-changing but life-enhancing experience they've had. I think particularly of the university student I met, who, if she walked into this chamber now, you would assume was born female, is living her best life and described in very powerful and unforgettable terms the impact that treatment has had for her and her quality of life. At the same time, I think of high-profile cases like Kira Bell's. And that is why we have to tread extremely carefully in this area, follow evidence, build an evidence base, and why these are such finely balanced judgments, and why I can be simultaneously uncomfortable with the permanent ban I put in place and uncomfortable with this clinical trial. I think that's hopefully reassuring to people that I think very deeply about these issues before taking decisions.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a deeply troubling time, as the Health Secretary has said, for the trans community. And I've heard that loudly from my trans constituents that have come to surgeries and in my postbag too. And when suicide rates amongst trans people are higher, much higher than the general population, we know where denying that they exist or denying them life-saving healthcare leads. So what reassurances can the Secretary of State give to my trans constituents and the families that support them, who are extremely worried that they won't be able to access the healthcare that they need?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question, and I think the reassurance that we can provide to trans people in our country is that we are committed to making sure they have access to the highest quality and evidence-based healthcare. And that doesn't just apply in the case of children and young people, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope to report to the House before the Christmas recess the work that's been undertaken in the Levy Review into adult services too. So we are committed to making sure that we provide high quality care to a particular vulnerable group of children and young people.
Kirsty Blackman.
Although I disagreed with the permanent ban that was put in place, it is to the Secretary of State's credit that he has been very clear about all of the competing issues that he's balancing in order to make the decisions that he's making, and I do appreciate that. What I would like to ask is for those young people who were hoping or are hoping to be part of the clinical trial or hoping to receive puberty blockers for whatever reason, whether it will genuinely make a difference to their lives or whether they believe it will make a difference to their lives, how is he going to ensure that they are given appropriate support, the young people that do not get to become part of this trial when they've been hoping that this will be something that will change their lives?
Grateful to the honourable member for her question and the way she puts it as a critic of some of the decisions I've taken in this space. I think the reassurance I can offer is that the way in which the whole study will work is looking at the holistic care that this particular group of children and young people receive, and making sure that on the wider therapeutic side, in terms of mental health support, that support is there, it's evidence-led. So regardless of whether a young person receives puberty blockers, they will certainly receive that wider range of support.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I really appreciate how the Secretary of State is taking a science-based approach. Yeah. I would like to understand, we use puberty blockers for many different conditions. Will there, within this trial, also be looking at the data that has been amassed from those use of puberty blockers for other conditions? Can we also just state on record puberty blockers are reversible, as shown in the evidence? When you stop taking them, they stop working. That is the science behind them. And finally, young people in my constituency are more likely to age out of gender services than they are to get their first appointment. What are we doing to shorten that waiting time, not just for puberty blockers, but actually for all the range of services the NHS provides for trans children?
Response. If members do not keep their questions short, I will not get everybody in, and the answers need to be just as short. Thank you.
I will try, Madam Deputy Speaker. The answer to my honourable friend's question is, firstly, we will make sure that in terms of the wider support that young people receive, that they get good access, that it's evidence-led, and I've had to wrestle with the fact that some trans people enter adulthood without ever receiving any sort of health care, and I've been heavily criticised by those people in particular for some of the decisions that I've taken, and we're working to reduce waiting times I described. And the second thing to say, look, my honourable friend said that these are irreversible. Puberty blockers. We hear contrary views around the House of saying these are not irreversible. The truth is, the evidence in this area is mixed, and that's why I think we need to build a stronger evidence basis.
So, Julian Lewis.
The Secretary of State deserves our sympathy for having to negotiate such an ethical minefield. Can he tell us whether the data exist from all the people who had puberty blockers under the old regime? He mentioned having met one person for whom they'd worked well and one person for whom they were a disaster. Surely it should be possible to do a systematic survey of the dozens, if not hundreds, of people who went through this, and might that not be a slightly more constructive and less dangerous way forward?
The honourable member's absolutely right that we do need that data linkage study. That will happen. It won't produce the same evidence base as the clinical trial, and that's the distinction between the two. And it's frankly a disgrace that people have sought to withhold that kind of data. It is really important we get it right. I appreciate your sympathy. I would just say I've wrestled with this issue probably more than any other ethical decision I've had to make in this office. I don't require I don't seek any pity or sympathy for doing so. It's the job I signed up to. It is a job I love doing. I've taken great care and sensitivity in this area because of the particular vulnerability of this group of children, young people.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's fair to say that the recommendations of the CAS review were not welcomed by everyone, not least by all members of the LGBT+ community. But it was the Conservative Party who set out this review and accepted its findings. The Labour Party supported the review and supported the findings. Does the Secretary of State share my concern that there are those who now would seek to cherry-pick which of the findings they agree with and which they do not? And is it not the case that an independent review with such serious and important findings should be accepted in its entirety?
I think when it was published, there was, and I was in this chamber at the time, there was actually an overwhelming consensus in the House. There were some people who criticised and challenged the CAS review at the time, including outside of the House in the LGBT community. I've always supported the CAS review, led by one of our country's best paediatricians. And it is because of that that I'm proceeding in the way that I am, which is the way that Dr. Cass, now Baroness Cass, recommended, and I'll continue to follow the evidence and implement the CAS review comprehensively and fully.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A survey published today by Transgender Trend shows overwhelming public support for non-intrusive medical approaches for under-16s with gender dysmorphia. The public want this state-sponsored child abuse stopped. So, will the Secretary of State represent the will of the people, stop the trial, and instead introduce statutory legislation to access the evidence data from the 2,000 children and young people already given puberty blockers through the Tavistock scandal?
I'll take the honourable member's question in three parts. Firstly, in terms of the opinion polling she mentions, that does show that this country is overwhelmingly a kind country that wants to make sure that trans people and LGBT people more broadly are treated with kindness, compassion and inclusion. Secondly, I do not dismiss the opinion polling that shows a majority against this kind of trial. And so thirdly, I would say the reason I am doing this is because I have to think about this extremely small group of people. I do not know what it is like to walk in their shoes. I have to think very carefully about what's in their best interests, and the best way to do that is to build the evidence base we need to provide high quality healthcare. And I strongly do not agree with her characterisation of this study, which I think is in itself irresponsible.
Lynch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some of the political debate around this subject has really saddened me, not least the way that trans people's reality and experience has been denied. We even have evidence of British trans people from the 4th century. We have that evidence. They've existed forever. So can the Secretary of State confirm that this trial is a real attempt to get a proper evidence base for treatment for young people that is really needed?
My honourable friend is absolutely correct. It is about building the right evidence so that we get high quality, safe healthcare for this vulnerable group of children and young people.
Afra Brandreth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Children struggling with gender dysphoria and their families are trying to find their way through very difficult and often distressing times. We should be helping them, not experimenting on them. So should we not be following the example of other European countries, such as Denmark and Finland, who have shifted their policy towards counselling rather than medical interventions?
I'm sure the honourable member that we are absolutely, as part of this study, as well as part of the rollout of services across the country, focusing on the therapeutic support that she describes. We are implementing the CAS review that recommended this particular trial for this particular purpose, and we will follow the evidence in that respect. Of course, we do look at what other countries are doing, why they are doing it, and what research emerges.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have immense respect for my right honourable friend, particularly his commitment to equal access to healthcare. Could he speak a little bit more about the support on mental health for children and young people involved in the trials, those who won't be able to get the trials, and also people who are currently on puberty or receiving puberty blockers, or for whom the ban is causing them immense stress or worse?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Regardless of whether people are receiving this medication, we do need to make sure they receive the right therapeutic support to make sure they have healthy, happy childhoods, and they can understand themselves and the world they're living in and how they relate to it in a way that does not cause them distress or harm. That's my objective in this process.
Deputy Speaker. For young people questioning their gender, the Pathways trial is currently the only route allowed for accessing puberty blockers, which are a treatment that can be a vital respite from the anguish of going through puberty in a body that doesn't match your gender before long-term decisions may or may not be made as an adult. I therefore welcome the announcement of the trial, whilst recognising that significant barriers to entry remain. So, my question is, how will the Minister ensure that as many young people as need to can access the trial, including those who need to access puberty blockers as part of support to improve their mental health?
Can I thank the honourable member for a question? I don't doubt her sincerity and integrity on this issue. But I say to her respectfully, when she talks about barriers to entry, those barriers are safety and clinical oversight, as well as parental consent and the assent of the young person. I don't believe those are barriers. I believe those are necessary bars for participation in this trial.
Lindsay Farnsworth.
Deputy Speaker, and may I associate myself with the comments of previous members in relation to the fact that we're talking about humans who deserve to be treated with dignity. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, as a former Crown Prosecutor, I firmly believe that evidence is hugely important, and the Cass review said that there isn't enough evidence at present that puberty blockers are safe. But does the Secretary of State agree with me that the responsible thing for this government to do is not simply to ignore the plight of such young people, but rather to conduct the clinical trial to obtain robust evidence needed to direct policy going forward?
Yeah. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and given I also work for a former Crown Prosecutor, I couldn't possibly disagree with her on evidence.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for his response to the question. One thing we should all agree on: the human rights of all, including trans people, must be protected and delivered by government and supported by us all. The reason we are here today, I believe, is to discuss the risks and the potential adverse consequences of the Pathways trial that is being proposed. The trial compares the timing of treatment initiation rather than using a placebo, and there's no arm that provides psychotherapy as a treatment option without puberty blockers, and there's no arm assessing children who do not receive any of these options. So will the Secretary of State please consider ensuring that all various arms and channels are tested as part of this trial to get a complete picture rather than a partial picture which may be misleading?
Can I just firstly thank the honourable member for the way in which he puts his question. And I think it's so important to emphasise that right across this House, there are many people who oppose this trial who do want to see trans people well supported and protected and respect their identities. And I think that's important for everyone to bear in mind. He talks about placebo. I mean, for obvious reasons in this case, a placebo wouldn't be appropriate because it'd be very obvious whether or not a young person was receiving the real medication or the placebo. But the trial design has included a control group, and the way in which the trial is established is to help us distinguish between the benefits of receiving or indeed not this particular medication, as well as really close oversight of the impact on development. But he is right that we need to judge these things and look at it through the question of risk, and I think that is what led to Dr. Cass to make her recommendation and why I'm supporting it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Secretary of State's answers today and his ongoing support for the CAS review. From his previous answers, it's clear that the Secretary of State has seen public opinion, and I wonder if he might be prepared to call an independent clinical review, given that high degree of public concern about the trial.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to receive further clinical representations on this issue and to hear from experts on this issue. I hope the public will understand why, on this particular issue, I'm not simply led by opinion polling, and I have to follow the clinical advice and evidence, particularly given the enormous risks that surround these children and young people, including the risks that I carried and weighed on my shoulders and conscience when I denied access to puberty blockers by upholding the temporary ban and then making it permanent.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is now on child abuse to give children puberty blockers. This trial will take confused little minds, vulnerable children, and place them on a medical pathway with profound life-altering consequences. Childhood is a time of uncertainty, yet the state is intervening with drugs that many former patients now say they were never even capable of consenting to. How can this government justify experimenting on children rather than prioritising safeguarding, evidence and psychological support?
I just say to the honourable member, she's offered a political opinion, not a clinical judgment. And by that logic, we wouldn't have any medicine for children and young people, because we will have never undertaken clinical trials or studies, because we judge that children and young people can't take part in them. And that is objectively not a sensible position. I understand the sensitivity surrounding this particular issue, and she is right to say that there are people in our country who have received life-changing clinical interventions that they have later regretted, and as part of that regret have shared that they did not feel that at the time they were making and could have made an informed decision. And that is why this trial is set up in such a way that it has such strong clinical oversight locally as well as nationally. It cannot happen without not just the assent of a young person, but the consent of their parent or guardian. Those are important protections and safeguards, and I do not share her characterisation of this trial.
Speaker, I support the Pathways clinical trial, but it's clear that many young people presenting with gender incongruence won't be able to access the trial for whatever reason. I'm very concerned about the mental health of those who won't be able to access the clinical trial. What additional support can the Secretary of State provide for those people, particularly around their mental health? Because that is my concern.
The study obviously includes a lot of research around wider therapeutic support and interventions, including mental health support, and we're rolling out more clinics and services across the country to bring that care closer to home.
Question, Jim Shannon.
First of all, can I thank the Secretary of State for all that he does? He deserves credit. A mother from my constituency phoned me this morning. I'm going to quote her. Why is money being spent on this pathway when my child has been waiting for clinical support for 3 years and the waiting list is so long she may be moved to adult treatment? Why is government prioritising the tiny few over the many? With our children's mental health services at breaking point and parents at their wits' end trying to get their child diagnosed, how does government look in the eyes of the parents with rare diseases whose drugs are not funded by the NHS when government are funding this trial? Thank you.
I would say respectfully to the honourable gentleman, who I like very much, and his constituent, it is because I've also had to look into the eyes of people in this community who have not received the right care and seen the deleterious impact it's had on their mental health and well-being. I've had to deal with parents who've suffered loss and bereavement, and we have to make sure that we are doing the right thing by everyone, and this should not be an either-or choice.
Samantha Liblet, short question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trans people don't wake up at 18 suddenly trans, it starts before then. And when we talk about protecting children, this means protecting trans children so they can transition into adulthood knowing they had parents and doctors that were advocating for their needs. But this is not a prison sentence either, so I wonder if the Secretary of State can talk about the trial and if people change their mind, whether they are entitled to withdraw from said trial.
They certainly can, Madam Deputy Speaker, and if they withdraw, they still get the wider therapeutic support that they deserve.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're talking here about physically healthy primary school-aged children being injected with drugs to stop them growing up. There is nothing medically wrong with these children. What these children need is love, support and compassion to help them accept their healthy bodies. They are perfect just the way they are. The Health Secretary says he's uncomfortable with this experiment and his instincts are correct. In the haunting words of Keira Bell, a courageous young woman, a victim of the Tavistock scandal, I was an unhappy girl who needed help. Instead, I was treated like an experiment. And when these children, who are now going to be experimented on, become adults, they will want to know who did this to me. But this time, the truth will be this was state-sanctioned. Out in the open, I'm afraid to say, at the Health Secretary's say-so. So I am begging the Health Secretary, will he use his power as the politician in charge to do what he must know is right and stop this?
State.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I wish I had certainty on this issue, and in some ways I envy him for his certainty. And can also say to my honourable friend, having occasionally found myself a lonely voice when sat on those benches in my party, I respect the fact that it is not easy to be in a minority dissenting voice, especially when one feels so strongly about it. So I respect his position, even though I disagree with it. I do think this is the right thing to do. He is right that we need love and compassion and empathy for these young people. We also need to understand what health and care support will produce the best outcomes for these young people, and that's what this trial is about.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do thank the Secretary of State for his leadership on this issue. I think nobody envies him in the decisions he has to make, but he is making the right decision on this issue. During my election campaign, I met a fantastic mother, and I think no mother could have loved their daughter more. And she told me about how when her daughter entered puberty, she had to come to terms with her own biological sex and the impact that had on her mental health. So to delay puberty, she stopped eating. She ended up in hospital, well, arriving at hospital in an ambulance so weak that she had to be treated in the ambulance. So I welcome that this trial will look at some of the side effects of puberty blockers, but alongside that we'll also consider the impact of not taking puberty blockers in some cases. And can you also update us on how we will be kept up to date on this trial as it progresses?
I can certainly promise my honourable friend we will keep the House regularly updated. I must also say to him, it is those risks that he's described that have weighed heavily on my conscience when putting in place a permanent ban on puberty blockers. And I've understood the risk involved and the vulnerability of this particular group of children and young people. I also meant to say, in response to my honourable friend who asked the question previously, I would say that the parents of trans young people love their children very much, and that has been at the heart of so many of the representations that I've received from parents as well as young people.
Final question, Josh Newbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At its publication, the party opposite welcomed the Caste Review, including the clear recommendation for this trial. 8 years ago, the then leader of the Conservative Party supported self-ID and declared trans women are women. Now we have dog whistle statements like, if we leave these children alone, many will get over it, which the Shadow Minister said just yesterday in Westminster Hall. Would the Secretary of State agree with me that a rigorous clinical trial is the only way that we will get the impartial evidence that he needs to make informed decisions on gender-affirming care for trans young people.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend that we need a strong evidence base, that we need to conduct these conversations with great care, consideration and compassion, that we need to recognise the vulnerability of this particular group of children and young people and the fear that so many trans people in our country feel about whether this is a country that accepts and respects them. The political climate has changed since we made all the progress we've made on LGBT equality over the last 20 and 30 years. But do I think the character of this country has changed? Do I think we are less inclusive, less respectful, less loving or less caring? Absolutely not. Those are the hallmarks of this country and the British people. We might be having a debate about the efficacy of this trial, but I think the overwhelming majority of people in this House do so in that spirit of wanting trans people to live healthy, happy lives where they feel safe, included and respected in our country.
That is the end of the urgent question. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over as we prepare for the first statement. Statement on UK-EU Common Understanding negotiations, and I call the Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with permission, I'd like to make a statement on the Government's strategic partnership with the EU. The Government was elected with a manifesto commitment to reset relations with our European partners, to tear down unnecessary barriers to trade and to cut costs and red tape for British producers and retailers, to increase national security through strong borders and greater cooperation with our closest allies, and indeed to support jobs here in the UK and opportunities abroad. And in May this year, this Government agreed a new strategic partnership with the EU that the Prime Minister announced at the historic UK-EU summit, the first of its kind. It's a landmark deal that is good for bills, good for our borders and good for jobs. And we took this decision, exercising our sovereignty, to strike a deal in the national interest. We had to fix a bad deal passed on to us by the previous government, the first trade deal in history that made it harder to trade. And just as we have done with the US and India, this Labour government is striking deals to bring down bills for British people and open new opportunities for British businesses. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, since the summit, I've led negotiations with the European Commission to implement the commitments we made. So I'm therefore pleased to inform the House that earlier today, the UK and the European Commission concluded negotiations for the UK's association to Erasmus Plus from 2027. And it will open up world-class opportunities for students, teachers, youth workers, sports sector professionals and communities of all ages in our education, training, sport and youth sectors, both for the professionals that work in those sectors and, crucially, for our young people too. And for students, this means more chances to study, to train, to work, to volunteer abroad, gaining language skills and experience that makes them attractive to employers. For our teachers, youth workers and those who work in the sports sector, it means greater opportunities for professional development. And for our schools, colleges, universities and providers, it means access to networks and partnerships that will drive quality, encourage research links and enhance the reputation of the UK's world-leading education system. And indeed, I was meeting with students at the new City College in Hackney this morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see the range of benefits they're going to be, including also playing basketball. Now, as part of Erasmus Plus, participants can travel to any European Union member state and indeed several countries outside the European Union as well. It will go further than schemes that have come before it, offering a broader scope of activity and a specific focus on unlocking opportunities for all. This is an investment in opportunity for young people from all backgrounds, our workforce and our future, and it will open doors for tens of thousands more young people across the UK, renewing our ties with Europe and beyond. This Labour government has always been clear that we want young people no matter what their background or where they live in this country, to have access to the best opportunities in life. It's what we've consistently delivered, and it's what we are delivering with this announcement today. And we're pleased that the EU has agreed financial terms that represent a fair balance between the UK's contribution and the benefits this programme offers. The 30% discount in 2027 compared to the default terms in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is what has paved the way for UK participation in the programme. And we have also agreed, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be a review of the UK's participation in the programme 10 months after our association, so we can look at the actual data concerning the demand for funding in the UK. And going forward, any continued participation in Erasmus Plus under the next multi-annual financial framework will be informed by that data and our experience of association in 2027. We've always said, Madam Deputy Speaker, we won't sign deals unless they're in the national interest, and in this case, I'm happy to say the agreement passed that test. The Government will now work to maximise take-up across all sectors so the benefits of Erasmus Plus association can be fully realised. We'll work closely with institutions and our young people to support this, particularly amongst disadvantaged groups. And a UK national agency will be appointed to administer the programme in due course. In addition, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to inform the House that the UK and the European Commission have also concluded exploratory talks on the UK's participation in the EU's internal electricity market. And the details of this will be set out in an exchange of letters that will be published next week between Commissioner Maros Šefčovič and myself. Closer cooperation on electricity will bring real benefits to businesses and consumers across Europe. It will drive down energy costs and protect consumers against volatile fossil fuel markets. It will drive up investment in the North Sea and strengthen energy security. The UK and the EU will now proceed swiftly with negotiations on a UK-EU electricity agreement. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is not all. I welcome the clarification from the European Commission today that in practice there should be no carbon border adjustment mechanism costs levied on UK electricity exports, a welcome development that reflects our extensive use of renewables. Negotiations to link our carbon markets are also underway. This will cut costs, it will make it cheaper for UK companies to move to greener energy, and once agreed, it will save UK goods exports from EU CBAM charges on $7 billion worth of UK exports. Negotiations on the food and drink agreement are also underway, which will enable food and agricultural businesses to trade more cheaply and easily by slashing red tape and costly paperwork introduced by the last government, whether it's the £200 businesses currently face for export health certificates on every single shipment, or small businesses choosing not to trade with the EU altogether. And the new agreement that we have will put this right, boosting our exports, cutting costs for importers and bringing down prices on supermarket shelves. The UK and the EU are committed to implementing the commitments of the May 2025 summit in a timely manner. We are working swiftly to conclude negotiations on that food and drink deal and linking our carbon markets, I can tell the House, by the time of the next UK-EU summit in 2026. So across all these areas, the UK is clear, of course, there will be no return to the single market, customs union or freedom of movement. We will agree deals that are in our national interest. This government is exercising our sovereignty to deliver for the British people. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are committed to building this new strategic partnership with the European Union. Indeed, I spoke with my counterpart in the Commission, Maros Šefčovič, last week, where we underlined our shared commitment to implementing the common understanding the Prime Minister and the Commission President agreed at the UK-EU summit in May. Whether it is through boosting opportunities for young people and educators across the country, or cutting energy bills, or a food and drink deal that slashes red tape and cuts costs, I will always negotiate in the interests of this country and our people. And I will continue, Madam Deputy Speaker, to lead negotiations with the Commission. I look forward to the next annual UK-EU summit where this government will continue to build that new strategic partnership. It is what a grown-up, pragmatic relationship looks like. We work together under shared aims for mutually beneficial solutions to our shared problems. That is the approach this government is taking. That is the approach that is delivering results, and I commend this statement to the House.
Call the Shadow Minister, Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We on this side of the House recognise the importance of giving young people educational opportunities, but it is vital that the government benches clearly don't recognise the need for schemes to offer genuine value for money. Now, the UK already had the opportunity to remain a member of Erasmus, but it was precisely because the last government recognised that that scheme did not offer value for money to the taxpayer that we chose not to. And that is why the previous government created the Turing scheme instead. A global programme for young people in the UK that did not require a one-sided blank cheque to be handed over to Brussels. Now, the Turing scheme delivered 43,000 placements around the world last year, 23,000 of them to learners from disadvantaged backgrounds at a cost of just over £100 million. So can the Minister confirm that this statement does not in any way undermine the future of the Turing scheme, that that scheme is guaranteed, or are those opportunities being sacrificed for the smaller number of opportunities available under Erasmus+? Now, the Minister has confirmed that the UK is to pay £570 million as the cost of rejoining Erasmus+. We understand that is being paid for from existing budgets. So can the Minister tell us where is that money coming from? Or is this £570 million being added to the £6 billion send black hole that the OBR identified in the education budget? And does the Minister expect more than the 10,000 students a year from the UK who previously took part in Erasmus Plus to take part in the new scheme, or are we paying £570 million for essentially 10,000 placements a year? Now, the Minister spoke about a fair contribution being a 30% discount. Of course, it's only a matter of weeks since the government was briefing that a fair contribution would be a 50% discount. So it's clearly failed in those negotiations. But can the Minister assure us that whilst he says he's got this discount in the first year, that a discount will be available in subsequent years? And if that hasn't yet, those assurances haven't yet been received, is he prepared to walk away if the EU does not offer us a similar deal in future years? So the opposition has set out clear tests to ensure the government does not roll back on Brexit, including no backsliding on free movement. So can the Minister outline what protections will be put in place to ensure that rejoining Erasmus does not simply mean a return to free movement by the back door for young people? This is particularly important given his complete failure, when asked multiple times, to set out what size of cap he thinks would be appropriate for youth mobility. Now, rejoining Erasmus is just the latest attempt by the government to undo Brexit by stealth. And this fact became, Madam Deputy Speaker, this fact became clear from the very outset of these negotiations, when the government agreed to surrender UK fishing rights for 12 years to the EU, under the pretence that this would, and I quote, pave the way for the UK defence industry to participate in the EU's proposed new defence fund. Yes, 6 months later, this deal has collapsed after the EU's extortionate demands for billions of pounds to join the fund, with no guarantee of any return on the investment in the form of procurement. So can the Minister explain to our hard-working fishing industry why they won't be getting their fish back even after this deal has fallen through? Madam Deputy Speaker, the British people made clear their decision to take back control in 2016, but despite the government's protestations, their approach shows an increasing disregard for this democratic decision.
Thomas Simmons.
If I get this right, I I chose not to sign up to participation in Safe. It didn't represent value for money, and they're criticising me for that. They're now criticising me for signing up to something that is value for money. So let me just tell him about fish. I'll tell you what's a big advantage to our fishing sector that exports 70% of their catch to the EU. The food and drink agreement that I am going to secure by the time of the next UK-EU summit. That is what will benefit our fishers. And as for his point about the Turing scheme, I should just say from the dispatch box, first of all, that any person in this academic year currently on the Turing scheme will continue to be funded. I think it's important that I say that. But I have to tell him, I mean, the honourable gentleman's numbers are absolutely all over the place. And the Erasmus Plus, first of all, the Erasmus Plus scheme has changed significantly since the version that his government walked away from. But not only that, come off it. Do you think seriously that that lot could have secured a 30% discount at all? Absolutely not. So, the last year of the Turing scheme, the one figure the honourable gentleman did get right was that it was 43,200 people. Erasmus is a far bigger scheme. We will be looking for tens of thousands, 100,000 plus young people and others having opportunities from Erasmus. But let me just tell him this as well. It is a lot broader in terms of the opportunities than the Turing scheme. Because the Turing scheme is about colleges, it's about schools, universities. Erasmus Plus has wider opportunities around youth work, around sports, around staff being able to have professional exchanges as well. And let me just say, before they start talking about the fact that Turing is all around the world, the fact is that the grant-making bodies for Erasmus Plus in the UK can still allocate 20% of the funding if they want to, if people want to go to other parts of the world as well. So what this is doing is vastly increasing the opportunities, not just for young people, but for adult learners as well. And frankly, if the Conservative position is now to oppose a massive expansion in opportunities for young people, I will welcome that debate at the next election.
Rosie Writing. Madam Deputy Speaker, young people have lost so much. The pandemic kept them in their homes when they should have been in the classroom. Years of austerity under the Tories saw cuts to the services they rely on, and a bad Brexit deal stopped the invaluable chance to study abroad in Europe. Rejoining Erasmus opens up real opportunities for young people to study, train and gain experience abroad. So can the Minister talk more about how this experience can help young people grow in confidence and get them work ready?
Absolutely. My honourable friend is quite right about the wonderful opportunities this presents, not just around self-confidence, but the young people I was talking to only this morning at an FE college about how going overseas had helped them to grow as people. But don't just take my word for it. The Association of Colleges says this is brilliant news for further education colleges. Universities UK, fantastic news for the UK. The Russell Group universities, we are delighted, they say, about this reassociation. But who is opposed to this? The Conservative Party.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Dr Al Pinkerton.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his statement? We welcome his announcement today. As a recovering academic, which is a distinction I think I share with the Minister, I have witnessed firsthand the impact that the exiting the Erasmus scheme had on university student intake. Welcoming students from across the EU into our education institutions and giving our own students the opportunities to study abroad undeniably has strengthened our education system. So after years of campaigning, the Liberal Democrats welcome the news that the UK is finally set to rejoin the Erasmus scheme from 2027. However, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman expected there to be a however, whilst this represents an important first step towards rebuilding a closer relationship with Europe, I urge the Minister to go further and faster. So beyond this fixed-term experience of Erasmus+, will the Government commit to a proper youth mobility scheme for the benefit of the next generation? So can the Minister update the House on what progress has been made in those negotiations? Secondly, can he state how confident that he is that a food, drink and SPS agreement will be agreed by 2026? And how long thereafter will it take to fully implement that scheme? Agri-food and horticultural businesses cannot afford any further delays. And then finally, on the subject of unnecessary barriers to trade, which is where he started his statement, will his department commit at the very least to conducting a transparent assessment of the potential economic growth benefits of a UK-EU customs deal of the kind that this House voted for last week?
Thank you. So on the issue of the youth experience scheme, which I see being in the context of the 13 youth mobility schemes that already exist, many of which signed by the previous government, though they seem to have collective amnesia these days about it. That, together with the linking of our emissions trading systems and the food and drink agreement, we're aiming to conclude negotiations by the next summit. Now, he asked me the direct question about the implementation of the food and drink agreement. I want to see it implemented by the first half of 2027. That will mean a piece of legislation in Parliament in 2026 and getting it through Parliament. I hope, whatever our views may be, that we will have support in doing that as quickly as possible in 2027. Then I want to say more broadly as well about Erasmus Plus just for a moment. And indeed, it applies to the youth experience scheme as well. I want both of them to be open to people of all backgrounds across the United Kingdom. And Erasmus Plus, of course, people often talk about it as a university exchange program, and of course that is a vital part of it, but it isn't just a university exchange programme. It is accessible across the country. I've been looking, for example, at the Welsh Government's Tithe programme, which has done an extremely good job with regard to accessibility, and I think where there are lessons to be learned from that, we will absolutely do it. Where, of course, the Honourable Gentleman and I disagree is on the issue of the customs union, because the government has only in recent days signed an additional free trade agreement with South Korea. We have the economic deal with the United States, the free trade deal with India. All those things would have to be torn up if we went on the path suggested.
Hayes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I warmly welcome the announcement that the UK will rejoin Erasmus+. I had the opportunity to live and work in Europe as a young person aged 18, and it is an experience that has continued to benefit me throughout my life. And can I particularly welcome the extension of the scheme beyond study and the government's desire to extend that opportunity to young people from all backgrounds. It is one of the very many detriments of Brexit that young people were denied that opportunity to live and work and study through the Erasmus scheme. In announcing this very welcome development today, can the Minister confirm that he will now also be turning his attention to some of the other detriments that continue to be experienced, particularly by small and medium-sized businesses in my constituency, as a consequence of being unable now to trade in Europe because of barriers resulting from Brexit? And can he confirm work is ongoing in this area and that all options that are in the national interest will remain on the table?
My old friend is quite right, and on the first point, there will be now tens of thousands more people, many of them young people, who are going to benefit from the accession to Erasmus+. From what the Shadow Minister is saying, I think seriously they are going to go into the next election opposing people having these additional opportunities. To her second point around reducing trade barriers, 16,000 businesses since Brexit have stopped trading with the EU altogether, and she can be assured that on the food and drink agreement, the work is ongoing to seek to complete those negotiations by the next summit.
Select Committee Chair Simon Hall.
Well, with his white shirt and red tie, the Minister is doing a very good impression of an early visit from Santa. The announcements that he has made this afternoon are, I think, to be warmly welcomed. And he is to be personally congratulated for the good faith and the patience which he has shown with his, in his conversations with Mara Sekovich and others, and it is clearly paying dividends. Would he agree with me that those of us on this side of the House who last week voted against the idiotic proposal from the Liberal Democrats for a customs union have been proved right and them wrong, because the evolution of the relationship within the guardrails of the existing arrangement are the way to go, preserving those new free trade deals and seeing them extend, whilst encouraging businesses to trade with Europe?
Absolutely, and is always the case with the honourable gentleman. He makes sensible, well-informed contributions to this House. I'm very grateful for his kind words and his personal congratulation, which is deeply appreciated. And he is entirely right. There is a set of guardrails that are this government's democratic mandate, not to rejoin the single market customs union or go back to freedom of movement. We are exercising that independent trade policy, and we've seen that in recent days with the deal with South Korea. And within that framework, the announcement today shows that the negotiations are progressing and delivering tangible results for the British people.
We have less than 45 minutes for this statement, so questions must be short. Uma Kamaran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his announcement on Erasmus Plus today. His hugely welcome news in Stratford and Bow for students and my youngest constituents. Before I came to this place, I worked with the Mayor of London calling for an Erasmus scheme. And as a member of the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, we've constantly called for this alongside our European partners. So that students can have the same chances for opportunity that we had, so that they don't suffer the consequences of a Brexit they had no say in. Can the Minister outline the next steps of the UK's participation in this?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I should say thank you as well for the work that she does in the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, and indeed broadly the work that is done by that group. Clearly, there now needs to be an appointment of a national agency. I'm sure the House will appreciate that's a commercially sensitive matter, but I certainly hope to be doing that very, very soon to make sure that we have all that we need in place to support those who would like to participate from 2027. There will be great opportunities available. I look forward to doing all I can as a Minister to support people into them.
Barclay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister's statement didn't seem to say what the contribution to the EU will be. Media reports suggest £570 million, so that it can open borders to have youth workers and others come to the UK at a time of rising unemployment. Could you just confirm what is the amount that will be paid, and that will be more than will be raised from the family farm tax, which the budget said even at the end of this Parliament would only raise up to £500 million a year?
So you would expect the price to be £810 million. With the discount, it is £570 million. However, the honourable gentleman is completely misunderstanding because, of course, substantial amounts of that money come back in the form of grants to our own people who are applying to be on the scheme. But what I've also done, to his point about value for money, is I've also made sure that this argument around a fair balance is embedded. That is the basis we will continue on. But there will be, after 10 months, a review of this on exactly this point to look at that balance between contribution and participation. But if he wants to do something useful in terms of the balance, he could do a lot of work encouraging his own constituents to participate.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for this statement as a proud Erasmus graduate, and as the first in my family to go to university, and as a carer for my late mother. I didn't study abroad. I stayed at home and commuted to university, so Erasmus was the first time I was able to experience that. And I think back to now, many years on, I still have connections and friendships formed from that scheme, and now to know that the young people in my constituency will be able to benefit from that is so, so vital. Can the Minister just outline a bit more in terms of the time frame so that we can make sure that this is rolled out not just to those young people in university, but to those apprentices, to those youth workers, to those studying, to make sure they get their life skills and experiences that are so rich and that will stay with them for life?
Minister.
Yeah, my honourable friend speaks very powerfully about the transformative experience that she had, and my aim today is to have, in years to come, others who can speak similarly of the transformative experience that she has had. With regard to moving forward, as I say, firstly, it will be about the appointment of that national agency, but it is then about really important work next year, getting the application process up and running, but making sure that people have that information and are supported to be able to take advantage of the wonderful opportunities that will be coming in 2027.
Lena Moran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hallelujah!
Hallelujah! It feels like some common sense is finally re-entering this debate, and I warmly welcome this, and so do my constituents in Oxford, West and Abingdon, who I remember wrote to me at the time, many of whom literally in tears, because they were worried that they wouldn't be able to participate, and in fact they couldn't. But I do hear what others are saying, trying to poo-poo how much this is worth. It's not just about the money, but there is money to be recouped here too. There will have been an impact assessment. How much is this worth to the UK economy now and going forwards?
Minister.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I can't better the first word that she used as part of that contribution. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we move forward, we will be making the kind of assessments that the Honourable Lady is talking about. And she's absolutely right to say this will make a significant contribution to our workforce and indeed to our economy. But I will also say as well, because we hear the chuntering from opposite, it isn't only about money. This is also about the way in which young people's lives, and indeed adult learners' lives as well, are going to be enriched in so many ways. This is something we should celebrate across the House.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I congratulate the Minister on doing what I think many of us have felt has been needed in this relationship between the European and the UK, which is what therapists call active listening. And actually listening to our neighbours and what they are interested in and where we can do a deal, and recognising in a relationship that those who keep making random demands, whether it is about a customs union or rejoin or fish, fail to recognise the importance of communication to negotiation. I note that the original wreckers of this relationship have not turned up today to explain to Britain's young people who bore the consequences of their bad behaviour on their future why they felt that was necessary. But he will also know there are many more people in this country and in our constituencies now looking at the work he's doing to repair this relationship and seeking some Christmas cheer. So for all those businesses still facing the piles of paperwork and mountains of red tape, can you play Santa a little bit more and tell us about what 2026 might bring in resetting this relationship and getting Britain back on track with its neighbours?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I pay warm tribute to the campaigning work that she does on this issue. And in 2026, at that next UK-EU summit, as is agreed, what we will be seeking to do is to complete the negotiations on a food and drink agreement, which would mean less red tape, less cost for businesses, the linkage of our emissions trading system so that we don't have our businesses levied with carbon taxes, and also completing the negotiations on the youth experience scheme to have even more opportunities for our young people. That will be a positive 2026.
Julie Lewis.
May I thank the Minister for the work he did in another capacity on behalf of the victims and the relatives of the victims of the infected blood scandal. He did a very good job, and he reached out to us in a much appreciated non-partisan way. Now, this statement's entitled EU-UK Common Understanding Negotiations. Is it his understanding, as the Minister for EU Relations, that the people with whom he's having dealings are still bent on the creation of a federal United States of Europe? And do I detect some chuntering on the opposite benches to suggest that some people in this House might want to be a part of that?
Minister.
Well, on the second part, I think he's best directing that question to the Commission. But could I just, in relation to the first part of his question, I always, and he knows this, have worked cross-party on infected blood, and I will continue to do so. I think that's very, very important. But also just to say, in relation to working with our European friends and neighbours, whether it is the work the Prime Minister is doing, leading the coalition of the willing, or the work we are even doing, the painstaking work we are doing in recent days on Russian assets, that close relationship, that UK-EU strategic partnership is crucial for our nation's security.
Hannah Dollymore.
I really welcome the return of Erasmus, and with it the opportunity for young people in Hastings and Rye to study and train in Europe again. As a coastal town, we also want to see the return of our closest link with our European neighbours, bringing back international trains to Ashford International, which this Labour government is supporting. I hear many South East colleagues echoing those calls. So could the Minister, in his discussions with European colleagues, encourage those discussions with Eurostar and urge Virgin Trains, who will be soon running trains on that line, and Sir Richard Branson to stop at Ashford International?
Minister, that was a wide.
I think my honourable friend did manage to create some cross-party consensus then, which is pleasing to see. But look, she makes a very powerful case. I certainly, whether it is with regard to the particular issue around Ashford that she raises, but many other issues of transport as well, my door is always open to these issues, and I'd very much welcome her making those representations formally to me as well.
Stephen Gethins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's almost 30 years, I'm afraid to say, since I made the transformative journey from Dundee to Antwerp for my Erasmus experience. Can I thank the Minister, because there is some progress in this. Can I ask him a couple of practical questions? One is, obviously there's a different higher education system in Scotland. Scottish universities are very involved in this. How will the financial mechanisms work? Has he worked that out with the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations? And secondly, I want to see all young people have the opportunities that he and I enjoyed. When will we see a return to freedom of movement for our young people entirely?
Minister?
Well, I disappoint you on the last bit, because we won't be going back to freedom of movement. But in terms of the question he raised, I was talking to the Scottish Government only first thing this morning, and that same issue was raised. And obviously it doesn't affect the home fees position. And by the way, that is distinct in England, Scotland, and indeed in Wales. So in the university context that he's talking about, some would have their home fees position, but then in a particular year they could, for example, take a gap year and take advantage, hopefully, of the Erasmus Plus opportunity. I'm pleased to hear that Erasmus Plus was transformative for the honourable gentleman in Antwerp, and I hope we will have many more people soon who can say the same.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend my right honourable friend for his diligent and detailed work on this. It really is proper grown-up politics, as he said. The return of Erasmus will be widely welcomed in Cambridge, where it's helped many young people in the past and will help an even wider group in the future. But could I just press him on the point about the SPS agreement? I think he confirmed we'll see the back of the wretched export health certificates in 2017. If so, that's a fantastic change. Is that correct?
Minister?
Yes, indeed, and there are fees on businesses today, £200 per consignment on export health certificates, £1,400 if you're selected for sampling, £61 identity checks, all of which can be swept away when the SPS agreement is implemented. And as I indicated in relation to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, the objective is to implement it in the first half of 2027.
Morrison.
The intentions behind the Erasmus scheme are unobjectionable, but 570 million is an awful lot of money. So I'm very pleased that there will be a review after 10 months. Will that review include an assessment of the scheme against what happened in the past, which essentially was to provide a benefit for predominantly middle-class humanities university students? And will he ensure that the opportunity cost to further education, which is tasked with upskilling our young people from a different demographic, are adequately taken into account?
Minister?
Well, first of all, in relation to the further education act, and by the way, I do agree with the point that this has to be open to people from all backgrounds. And I do think the Erasmus Plus scheme of today is very different even to how it was 10 years ago. But to give him some reassurance, the Chief Executive of the Association of Colleges that represents our FE sector called this today, and I quote, "brilliant news for staff and students of all ages in further education colleges." I hope that gives him the reassurance that it isn't simply about universities, hugely important though our university sector is. And secondly, to his point about the review is absolutely data-led. We've had this debate before about participation versus contribution. I've always said there has to be a fair balance. That's why I've negotiated the discount in the way that I have. But what that review will do is allow us to move forward on the basis of solid data and numbers of participants, and data-led decision-making is what I'm always in favour of.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As Chair of the UK EU PPA, can I firstly welcome today's statement and also commend my honourable friend for the stellar job that he is doing, showing that this Labour government is making very, very good progress on rebuilding our relationships with the EU. Rejoining Erasmus Plus is a big win for young people in Battersea and across the country, creating opportunities to study, to train, to develop new skills, achieve success, and more importantly, thrive. So can the Minister just outline just a bit more about how young people will be able to access the Erasmus Plus scheme?
Briefly outline, Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the work that she does co-chairing the PPA. In 2026, it's critical that we have both the national agency, but also then the simplest process that we possibly can have for people to be able to access a very wide range of benefits. I hope that's short enough, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Carmichael.
Speaker, it's great to see the Paymaster General at the dispatch box, as always. It would be even better if we could see him at the EFRA Select Committee, who are taking a close interest in the Food and Drink Agreement. Can I remind him that Boris Johnson got it badly wrong with the Trade and Cooperation Agreement because he allowed the political imperative of getting a deal to trump the detail of that deal, and that was because he didn't listen to the fishermen, the farmers and the other food producers. Will he keep them close as he negotiates it, and will he come to talk to the Select Committee? We really won't bite him, I promise.
Minister.
I'll hold him to that promise, Madam Deputy Speaker. But in relation to working with the sectors, he's absolutely right. And as we move forward, firstly to complete the negotiations for detailed legal text on the SPS agreement, but also as we move into the implementation phase, everyone understands we are reducing barriers, we are cutting red tape, we are making trade easier, but absolutely we have to work with whether it's our fishers, our farmers, but all the agri-food sector as well to make that as smooth as possible.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The return to UK's involvement in Erasmus is hugely welcome, not only for my constituents who are at university, but also those working or learning in schools, FE colleges and working in the sports and youth sectors. So could my right honourable friend please outline what steps the government is going to be taking, particularly to those based in those sectors not previously involved, so that they can expect to and plan for involvement in Erasmus from 2027?
No, my honourable friend raises a really important point. And, for example, this morning, the first place I wanted to visit was a further education college, the New City College in Hackney. So I'm really keen that the FE sector gets the full benefit, but she's absolutely right. Proactively reaching out, whether it's the youth sector, whether it's in terms of adult learners, whether it's in terms of staff and professional training, that's going to be really important because people can then understand the opportunities that are there if they want to take advantage of them.
I only have 20 minutes remaining, so colleagues must keep their questions short and the answers just as short. Dame Harriet Bolwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Minister just spell out for the House's benefit how much taxpayers' money he's signed up to spending next year and then for every year in this Parliament? And in terms of value for money, where Parliament can read about the value for money, and what line item of the budget this money has come out of?
Minister.
1 year, £570 million, which is a 30% discount, better than the party opposite ever achieved. 10 months in, you'll have a full review of both participation and contribution. And I say gently to the honourable lady, if she is going to go into the next election saying that young people in her constituency who benefit from Erasmus Plus should no longer do so, I'd welcome that debate.
Grace.
Deputy Speaker, as a member of the EU-UK PPA, I absolutely welcome the statement today, but particularly that we will be rejoining the Erasmus Plus scheme to the benefit of young people in Exeter we should never have left. This is the next step in rebuilding relations with our closest neighbours after such a catastrophic period under the previous government. Does the Minister agree with me that it's only through cooperation with our closest European neighbours and partners and not isolation that we get the cultural, social and economic growth that this country really needs?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. There are mutual benefits, mutual objectives, and I'm afraid to say in modern-day Europe, mutual threats that are faced by the UK and the EU. That closer cooperation to deliver results is absolutely crucial.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This deal will not give back the futures that were stolen from so many young people by Boris Johnson's government, but it does offer those futures to people going forward. It is good work. That said, small, medium and large businesses in Tewkesbury and the economy at large need the government to stop fumbling around the edges. It is time for the Minister to speak to the government and get us a customs union with the European Union. Is it not?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is time to deliver concrete results, and that's exactly what I'm doing.
James Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I saw a good joke earlier which said, it was one-liner, Lib Dem campaigning works. I don't think so. It's this Labour government that has delivered the change today. University of Nottingham staff in my constituency face considerable pressure due to ongoing restructuring. I wonder what the Minister would say today to those staff under intense pressure about what this offers at an organisational level for our universities.
I mean, my honourable friend raises a really important point, and I think that this is clearly good news and a good deal for our university sector. I think that is why both Universities UK and the Russell Group have come out supporting this in such glowing terms today.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Forgive me for not being full of Christmas cheer, because whilst people are welcoming this announcement, businesses in Northern Ireland are being disadvantaged, rising costs, significant trade barriers because of the Windsor Framework, delivery not available are regular for online shoppers in Northern Ireland, the immediate cliff edge of veterinary medicines, ICS2 and type approval for cars. When will this government stand up for Northern Ireland's place within the Union and sort out the trade barriers of this internal market?
Thank you. And I spoke to both the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland only this morning to discuss in particular the arrangements around Erasmus Plus and indeed the other announcements I've made on electricity as well. But I say to the Honourable Lady, I'm responsible as well for the Windsor Framework. I can assure her that it is a top priority for me. It is a top priority as well for the Prime Minister, who has a particular personal interest in Northern Ireland, having been the Human Rights Advisor to the Policing Board. And with regard to barriers to trade that she's referring to on the Irish Sea, it is precisely the result of pushing forward and getting the SPS deal implemented quickly that will allow us to lower those barriers on the Irish Sea, which is what I'm determined to do.
Annalise Dodds, after which I will come to Steve Darling.
Thank you. I also welcome progress on Erasmus, but can I ask about progress on another commitment from the May summit, that to advance cooperation on foreign information manipulation and interference, and to work together to fight violent extremism, including in its online dimension. The UK and the EU do indeed face threats including threats to our digital sovereignty from the same powerful people, so surely we need to urgently work together.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, whether it's in terms of information or indeed hybrid warfare. I've visited whether it's Estonia in opposition, but other parts of Eastern Europe as well, and I see what is happening on this every day. She's absolutely right in terms of the importance of partnership between the UK and the EU on this. It's in our national interest.
Thank you. And it is brilliant news for our young people today around the reinstatement of the Erasmus scheme. I would like to highlight to the Minister that I've heard from language schools in Torbay, particularly International House Torquay, who've taken advantage of a group travel scheme for German students to be able to just use their ID cards to learn languages in England. What opportunities do you see of rolling out a similar scheme for Swiss, Italian and Spanish students?
Minister.
I can update the honourable gentleman. Indeed, I will write to him on the 3 specific countries that he's mentioned. But I will also say the announcement that I've made today on Erasmus Plus clearly opens up now even more opportunities for schools, which I'm sure will be widely welcomed.
Christmas jumper Phil Brickle.
And as a former Erasmus student myself, can I congratulate the Paymaster General on the steely resolve, the pragmatism and the significant progress he has been able to achieve. Only a few weeks ago, 2 fellow Erasmus students from the UK who I studied with in Germany were in this place. I was with them for the first time in 13 years and they've messaged me today to congratulate the government. Does he agree with me that the most important thing is to deliver on the concrete commitments agreed with our EU partners on the May summit, as opposed to heeding the siren calls from the Lib Dem members opposite about a supposedly bespoke customs union?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I thank him for his kind words, indeed his two friends and former Erasmus friends and colleagues, and also, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, congratulate him on the Christmas jumper.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
That I welcome the Erasmus Plus agreement as closer ties with Europe are good news for the futures of thousands upon thousands of young people. Since 2022, the Tithe programme in Wales has offered life-changing opportunities for people to study abroad after Brexit slammed so many doors shut. Given its implications for Tithe, how will Wales's priorities be reflected in the administration of Erasmus Plus?
Good question. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, a Welsh MP did negotiate the new agreement, so hopefully that is a good start. But nonetheless, she's absolutely right to praise the Welsh Labour Government's work on the Tithe programme, and it's great to see her praising the work of the Welsh Labour Government. I went in November, actually, to speak to civic society groups and those who are involved in that Tithe outreach. And what I discovered was that the work in particular they've done in terms of involving students and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds has frankly been exemplary, and it's work I am looking at in terms of access to Erasmus Plus now.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's focus on jobs, bills and borders as part of a pragmatic and balanced reset of our relationship with the European Union. I've already heard from constituents like Robert in Boscombe, who is welcoming the fact that the UK will be rejoining Erasmus. When a government invests in our children, our country starts to care about our future again. So can I ask the Minister to update the House on progress towards a youth mobility scheme, and also what role he sees English language schools playing in our future economy as we bring European students to Bournemouth?
Minister.
It's always good to hear from him and indeed from Robert. As I indicated, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will look to have agreed the Youth Experience Scheme by the time of the next UK-EU summit, and he can be assured what a priority that is for the government.
Sarah Dyke.
Madam Deputy Speaker, mandatory method of production labelling on animal-derived products could improve animal welfare, increase UK farmer profits by over £46 million annually. But we must make sure the UK-EU SPF agreement is aligned on standards and quality, so British farmers in Glastonbury and Somerton across the country are not undercut by lower welfare imports. So can the Minister outline what progress has been made on negotiating a comprehensive SPS agreement?
So SPS negotiations are underway. We want to complete them by the time of the next summit. And on the specific issues she raised, I'd be grateful if she could write to me so I can address it in detail.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do refer members to my register of interest. And I thank the Minister for his statement. Although I'm trying hard to visualise him playing basketball at Hackney College this morning, perhaps photographs are available to confirm this actually happened. Apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker. So 73% of university-aged young people voted against Brexit. They voted to remain in the EU. So Erasmus always felt like a spiteful act. So I'm really pleased we were able to correct that injustice today. I worked in the university sector for almost 30 years before I was elected here, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hard to believe, I know. So I understand the benefits of Erasmus. But I do agree with the Minister that it wasn't a completely democratic process, and it was more middle-class students who tended to take part. So how will ensure that changes? Will there be monitoring? Will they consider targets?
A tip for other questioners: the question does not require a preamble. Minister.
I mean, I may have been putting it a bit high when I said playing basketball, but I did contribute in my own way, Madam Deputy Speaker. But with regard to his second point, obviously the Erasmus Plus programme has changed so that there's this wider range of activities available, as I've said, from youth work, adult education, sports. But also the way in which Erasmus support is provided means there is additional support when you're from a disadvantaged background. So of course he's right in terms of monitoring it, but my priority as well is making sure that we're driving that participation in the first place, which is the priority of the next few months.
Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for what is a clear Lib Dem win. I just want to repeat the question from my frontbench colleague regarding the need for a transparent assessment of the potential economic growth benefits of a customs deal, because in 3 years we will all be seeking a new mandate, and at that point, if we can really understand the potential economic benefits, then our residents and our citizens can make an informed decision. So can I please encourage him to give second thought to that study?
I've got a bit of bad news for him, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a Labour win, I'm afraid. But to his second point, I mean, if he wants to discuss the customs union, a good start might be the workers at Jaguar Land Rover.
Chris Wentz.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome the statement from my right honourable friend today. As he will be aware, my constituency of Harlow has a lower than average number of young people that go to university, something I would like to see addressed. However, can he talk to me through the benefits of the Erasmus Plus stream for those young people in my constituency of Harlow who don't necessarily go on to university education?
No, he's absolutely right. And to go back to this morning, I'd have in my mind someone who wants to do some basketball coaching, for example, which is what I was talking about this morning. Perhaps an engineer on an apprenticeship who has chosen not to go to university but might well want, nonetheless, to go to a placement abroad. So they are just some examples of what I think are the wide range of benefits I hope his constituents in Harlow will be able to benefit from.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I warmly welcome the Erasmus agreement that the Minister has announced, a Christmas present for young people. Turning to the SPS agreement that he is currently negotiating, I hope those negotiations will be just as successful because it is undoubtedly in the best interest of this country. So can the Minister confirm to me and to some very invested constituents of mine that bivalve molluscs or mussels will be included in the SPS agreement that he is currently negotiating?
Yes or no?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, the SPS agreement is a great priority. I'm fully aware of the issue around bivalve molluscs and indeed shellfish from what I believe are Class B waters from my memory. And certainly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm willing to speak directly to the Right Honourable Lady about the bivalve molluscs, and maybe she can write to me about it. But I can tell her this, the SPS agreement will mean products like British bangers and others that we currently can't export to the EU, we will be able to do so again.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend expect the new agency with responsibility for Erasmus Plus to work with the excellent Erasmus Plus Student Network UK to promote these brilliant opportunities for our young people, including in higher and further education institutions in Scotland?
I'd certainly expect to see that collaborative approach, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Monica Harding.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents in East and Walton will be delighted that the government is returning the UK to Erasmus Plus. One of my constituents wrote to me this morning, it's a win for those of us who think that international learning should be open to all, not just the children of the rich who can afford international fees. But she said, it is too late for me. I was 11 when Brexit happened and I'm now 21 in my last year of university. So will the government undo the wrongs done to kids like her by the last Conservative government, go further and faster and commit to a youth mobility scheme?
Well, the government is already committed to a youth experience scheme by the time of the next UK-EU summit. And whether it's through Erasmus Plus today or indeed the youth experience scheme, this government is delivering concrete benefits and opportunities for young people.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, whatever your view on Brexit, leaving the Erasmus scheme was unambiguously an act of self-harm, denying opportunities for thousands of young people across the country to study and learn abroad. So can I congratulate the Minister on re-securing those benefits, but they cannot just be the preserve of a narrow few. How can we make sure a far wider group of young people in my constituency are able to benefit from this new scheme?
My honourable friend is absolutely right about spreading those opportunities to people of all backgrounds. And of course, I will drive forward work as a minister. But I say to colleagues across the House, actually, speaking in favour of this scheme, it's something that we collectively, as members of Parliament, can be speaking about to our constituents as well.
Liz Jarvis.
Deputy Speaker, I absolutely welcome today's announcement, which will be of huge benefit to students from my constituency. Does the Minister agree with me that all young people from all backgrounds deserve to be able to work and study in Europe, and the party to my right should apologise for snatching opportunities away from an entire generation?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I entirely agree with the spreading of opportunities, and frankly, I'm absolutely baffled by the front bench position opposite.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the son of a Deutschlehrer, can I say danke, because Christmas has come early to the young people and the teachers in my constituency of Rugby, and that's because, does the Minister agree with me that greater cooperation and friendship across Europe and beyond is the best way forward for our world and for our country, and perhaps that is why those with EU derangement syndrome are so opposed to his policy.
Yeah. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the cooperative grown-up approach we're using is delivering results and benefits for people here in the United Kingdom. I'm proud of that approach, and it is what delivers.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This scheme will help countless young people from Wokingham to gain invaluable life experiences, and it is to be welcomed. The Minister says that the Conservative Brexit deal was a bad deal. Will he therefore look to correct this and begin to negotiations for a bespoke UK-EU customs union, helping to cut the endless red tape and freeing up many Wokingham businesses to do business with their European customers? A bespoke deal like that could raise £25 billion, far better than increasing national insurance contributions.
The honourable gentleman is very welcome to continue his debating. Whilst he's doing that, I will correct the iniquities in the previous deal every working day.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was Christmas Eve 5 years ago when Boris Johnson signed his fateful deal, which took away opportunities for young people, kicked us out of Erasmus. So can I thank the Minister for exercising that ghost of Christmas past? And can I ask him if he agrees with me that the message we've heard in this chamber today is the Conservative Party wants to keep opportunities locked away from young people. Reform cares so little that they haven't even shown up. And if you want to extend opportunities for our young people, you need to back a Labour government.
Minister.
100%, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's this Labour government that's delivering for our young people.
Final question, Ben Coleman. In an hour, Ben Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I congratulate the Minister as heartily as everyone else has for bringing the UK back into Erasmus, ensuring that people from all backgrounds, including university students, can once again enjoy the opportunities that the Tory Brexit took away. Part of my constituency of Chelsea and Fulham ranks among the 12 most deprived areas in the United Kingdom, and I'm looking forward, I should tell the Minister, to helping the young people there seize the new opportunities. But may I also encourage the Minister to be ambitious in concluding a youth experience scheme which would further restore the opportunities our young people deserve?
Absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker, and indeed by the time of the next UK-EU summit we'll hope to have concluded negotiations on the linking of our emissions trading systems, on the food and drink agreement, and also as well on the youth experience scheme.
That is the end of the first statement. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over as we go on to our second statement on provisional local government finance settlement. And if the Minister is ready, Minister Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 20th of November this year, my department published a policy statement setting out our approach to the first multi-year local government finance settlement in a decade. Today we publish the provisional settlement itself and launch our formal consultation on these proposals, and it represents the choices we are making as a government. Unlike the Tories, we won't look the other way as poverty gets worse. We won't ignore the economic and social costs of deprivation. The spending review announced over £5 billion of new grant funding for local services over the multi-year settlement period. This includes £3.4 billion of new grant funding being delivered through this settlement. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I give more details, I want to make this point, because for 14 years the Tories decimated local government, asking local leaders to do more with less, and this had consequences. Local high streets are always changing, but deprived towns saw more empty shops, more vape shops, more pawnbrokers than other places, and their councils didn't have the resources to do anything about it. In 2019, CIPFA found that nearly 800 libraries had closed since 2010, and in 2022, The Guardian newspaper uncovered a real terms annual cut of nearly £330 million to the upkeep of our local parks, with the biggest cuts in the poorest parts of the country. The last decade and a half of austerity impacted every community, but the very worst effects were felt by people living in the most deprived areas, and that was a choice. By breaking the link between funding and deprivation, the Tories punished poorer councils. Year after year, they exacerbated inequality, and as a result, too many places in this country feel forgotten, left to fend for themselves. Now, the answer isn't reforms return to austerity. or the Tories carping from the sidelines. It's to use the best data we have available to redesign the funding system so that deprivation is recognised and addressed within the settlement. That's why the figures we are publishing today are derived using the very latest data from the 2025 Index of Multiple Deprivation, released at the end of October this year. It's why, according to our analysis, whereas under the old system, deprivation scores could only account for 25% of variation in per capita funding allocations. Under this settlement, it's up to 75%, with other important factors such as coastline, miles of road or visitor numbers making up the rest. And more, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are giving councils more certainty, with the first multi-year settlement in a decade allowing local leaders to focus on long-term investment and change. We're addressing the damage of austerity by maintaining the £600 million recovery grant allocations from 25-26, targeted towards those most impacted by the cuts, and introducing a recovery grant guarantee providing an above real terms increase to social care authorities who received the grant last year. We're supporting local authorities through change by providing funding floors and phasing in new allocations across the multi-year settlement. We're improving efficiency and value for money by simplifying an unprecedented 36 funding streams worth over £56 billion over the multi-year settlement. We're resetting the business rates retention system to restore the balance between aligning funding with need and rewarding local growth. And we are unlocking the dream of home ownership for more people by boosting real incentives for councils to build new homes. And we know councils are concerned about what will happen at the next spending review, so we'll keep working very closely with them to avoid cliff edges in funding. This settlement, Madam Deputy Speaker, is our most significant move yet to make English local government sustainable at last. It will take overall core spending power for local government to over £84.6 billion by 28-29, equivalent to a 15% cash terms increase compared to 25-26. The Labour government has made it clear it backs local government through action. Since coming into power, we have made available a 23.6% increase in core spending power in 28-29 compared to 24-25. However, we have to do more, because the previous government's funding system left local government in chaos. Social care costs were soaring out of control, with very little focus on prevention. And right now, children's social care, the impact of a failing SEND system and the spiralling costs of homelessness and temporary accommodation has destabilised council funding, even where councils have acted judiciously to protect the public pound through this difficult era. And that's why we need national change to empower local councils to maximise the benefits of this statement. This government is building a national care service based on higher quality of care, greater choice and control and better integration. This is backed by around £4.5 billion additional funding made available for adult social care in 28-29 compared to 25-26. We're changing children's social care through the Families First partnership, funded with £2.5 billion over the next 3 years. Because all children deserve good parenting and a loving home environment. And we know that costs less in the long run too. And the children's social care residential market is broken. That's why we're taking action through the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Using these powers, the Housing and Education Secretaries will explore how we might implement a profit cap in the children's social care placement market. This would be a crucial step in ensuring public money delivers value and care, not profiteering. And we'll set out further information on our approach in 2026. On special educational needs and disabilities, the Government will bring forward the Schools White Paper in the new year, which will set out ambitious plans to reform special educational needs provision. But we recognise the impacts that the dedicated schools grants deficits are having on local authorities' accounts. In future, special educational needs provision will be funded by central government. Local authorities will not be expected to fund costs from general funds once the statutory override ends in March 2028, and will provide further details on our plans to support local authorities with these deficits later in the settlement process. And Madam Deputy Speaker, members have already heard me say this on homelessness, but I know temporary accommodation is also a growing financial pressure on councils, with spend reaching nearly £3 billion in 24-26. That's why last week we published the National Plan to End Homelessness, our strategy to prevent homelessness before it occurs. And we've set clear objectives to get our children out of costly B&Bs and to help councils balance the books. Now, on council tax, the government intends to maintain a core 3% council tax referendum principle and a 2% adult social care precept for the vast majority of councils. The government is committed to ensuring the funding system is fair for taxpayers across the country, and in some areas, council tax levels are radically lower than others. Council tax bills for £10 million houses in some of the wealthiest parts of the country can be less than an ordinary working family pays in places like Blackpool or Darlington. The government plans to lift referendum principles in 27-28 and 28-29 for Wandsworth, Westminster, Hammersmith and Fulham, City of London, Kensington and Chelsea, and Windsor and Maidenhead. And this will improve fairness. Taxpayers in these councils have the lowest bills in the country, and this year they paid up to £1,280 less than the average council taxpayer. This change will enable the government to allocate over £250 million of funding more fairly in the system, instead of subsidising bills for the 500,000 households in these councils. It will also provide greater flexibility for these authorities in deciding how to manage their finances following our reforms. The councils will decide on the level of council tax increase to set, on whether to draw on the relatively high alternative sources of income that a number of them benefit from. Now, we know adapting to our reforms will take time. That's why we'll continue to have a support framework in place next year to help authorities in challenging positions. Following precedent set by previous governments, councils in significant financial difficulty can request additional flexibility from the government. In making this decision, unlike the Tories, the government has been clear that it would not agree to increases where the council has above average council tax. In recognition of cost of living pressures, each application will be considered on a case-by-case basis, and decisions will reflect the support offered to low-income and vulnerable residents. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, in closing, I go back to the libraries closed and the parks neglected. Under this Labour government, not only is our Chancellor of the Exchequer making sure our schools have libraries, but with this funding, councils can make sure that parks are good for our children to play into. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can never turn the clock back. We can't undo all the past damage to councils. But we can change town hall finances so that councillors battling the consequences of poverty have a government on their side for once. Yeah. We said that we would restore the link between funding and deprivation, and today we are doing exactly that. Yeah. No more forgotten people left to fend for themselves, no more forgotten places sneered at by members opposite, but a fighting chance for every place in this country, and I commend this statement to...
Yeah. Shadow Minister.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's no surprise that the government has sought to sneak this consultation out with the minimum of attention.
Come on, David.
Proposed as it was for simply a written ministerial statement at the last possible second. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can all see that poverty is rising. A shrinking economy and rising unemployment are driving that, combined with inflation running at 3.6% and energy bills higher. Rising business rates, Madam Deputy Speaker, are crippling our businesses, and local communities everywhere are feeling the pressure created by this government's choices. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, how does this settlement help our councils to deal with that? Well, firstly, it assumes that working people, all people, will pay higher taxes everywhere. We should not misunderstand the Minister's words on core spending power. This enshrines an assumption that taxes will rise to the maximum possible extent everywhere, with fees and charges for parking, libraries and everything else following the same trajectory. And Madam Deputy Speaker, even if the inflation target of 2% is reached, and currently at 3.6%, that seems unlikely, the increase assuming 2%, represents a 1% uplift for local government during the whole life of this Parliament, for a sector that was left £1.5 billion worse off by the rise in national insurance contributions alone. Resources at a local level are going backwards, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a settlement that punishes efficiency, with those councils that deliver the best value for money being raided to bail out the more spendthrift. And I'm sure we can guess which parties tend to run those councils. It is a settlement which introduces new higher taxes on hospitality, voted for by every other party besides the Conservatives in this chamber, bearing down on investment and opportunity. It brings in a homes tax on more expensive homes, money that goes to the Treasury, not councils. In the book, Red Book, that's estimated to cost the government a net £335 million due to the damage it does to the housing market. Only this hapless Labour government could bring in new taxes that actually cost the Treasury money. Absolutely. And here they go again. And also, Madam Deputy Speaker, it repeats the fallacy that poverty is the only driver of council costs. The average English local authority delivers over 800 different services. Our rural coastal areas, anywhere with lots of retirees, faces high costs of adult social care, but don't necessarily score high on indices of deprivation, despite those costs being driven by statutory duties. The Undertaker Prime Minister is ushering many councils towards their financial doom. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, as they hammer Wychavon and Stratford-on-Avon, they're also hammering Ashfield, Dartford, Burnley, Cambridge, Hyndburn, Lichfield, Burnley and Bolsover, amongst the places worst hit by this financial settlement. Their detachment from the consequence of their actions is striking. And this is whilst the Prime Minister and Chancellor dodge the new high-value council tax in their grace and favour accommodation. And all of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, behind those smoke and mirrors which disguises from our local authorities the financial impact. They've been required to carry out their public budget consultations without having had sight of the impact that this will have. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me conclude with some straightforward questions. Can the Minister tell the House when our locally elected brethren will learn the net impact of this on their council tax budgets? Can she tell the House when we'll debate the impact of their cuts to SEND capital funding? When will the House have the opportunity to scrutinise the government's decision to impose exceptional financial support or higher council tax rises to bail out the consequences of its decisions? When will it provide clarity on the impact of its SEND proposals on council budgets? How will the government use the budgets allocated to the new devolution areas and now snatched back to mitigate the impact of their decisions? And will the Minister admit to the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is a tax-raising, job-destroying, housing-hobbling, rate-raising, service-slashing, community-crippling, election-cancelling settlement that fails even on its intended purpose of shunting resources to politically favoured areas?